Boop, boop, doop, boop, 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 boop. Okay. Hmm. Yup. Good morning. I was gone. And then I came back. We're not running, Buxy. We're not running. You thought they kidnapped me? They'll never take me alive. Went on the run. The cats. More like the emus showing up at the door. Man, we got some catching up to do, but not too much. It was pretty chill yesterday. And nothing really huge to report. And I'm on today because I think that a breakout is imminent. In terms of this setup, anyways, I think we're ready to move back up to the wave. So it's a little debatable on the whole where that wave might lead us. But I think fairly confident we'll get back up to that 503. And that's a breakout because reasons. Now, if we were to go back up, and we'll get to that in a second, if we were to go back up to 503, 505, something like that today, we're actually in a really, 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 really good position to start advancing. So I told my Discord group that I wasn't going to stream until it's time for breakout. And so here I am. So I think it's happening now, or it's going to be happening very, very soon. And there's a couple reasons for that. So we'll get that going. I just want to make sure all my links are shared in the right places. I think I put them. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to put them on this other channel. Yeah, it's time. All right, I'm going to hop off of the Discord group now so I free up my internets. You'll be all right, Dave. 503's already hit? Yep. Look, it doesn't mean it's going to go, but that's like the first threshold. So yesterday it was kind of like just whimpery downward motioning kind of nonsense. And I was mentioning in my Discord group all day I was on there, on and off, just kind of conversing with different ideas and talking to people about things. And Why that? Why not be on here? Because I had other stuff to do. I did some things yesterday that I've been putting off for a while. So here's the deal, okay? All right. I'm going to lay it out for you in terms of a couple things. One, Booksy Talk. Then we'll talk about EMAs. And we'll talk a little bit about Wyckoff, okay? So Booksy Talk, all right? This is a breakout above the creek. It is pushing resistance and then coming back down and laying on top of that creek. I mentioned last week that there was a possibility that you could delay for quite a while, even an entire week down here. I said it pretty clearly, and then I also said it on the Discord group, so there's timestamps and everything, okay? So I'm not saying that to like cover my butt. I'm just saying like this is not something that's really frightening me or worrying me, because what it looks like to me is a delay tactic, okay, where you're using iterative motion to keep the price from breaking out too soon. You don't want to break out too soon. If you're an operator, the question that was being asked was why bother delaying the price? If you've got what you need, why can't you just run it? And my answer to that was, well, why not? Because if you have very little volume from retail coming in, then it doesn't cost a whole lot to control this. And you basically can take your time trading shares, and all you really have to do is find sellers. If you want to buy, you just have to find more sellers. Super simple. Okay. So what I see here is pretty evidently like a cat ear iteration. So you've got like one right here, you've got two right here, and then you got three right here. So what is that? It's just a walk down. It's not complicated. What else is going on with it? It's narrowing. So therefore it's like what? Well, it's like a triangle, okay? A wedge, as people would call it. So you've got an iterative move down. You're walking down to levels that, frankly, we kind of like already knew were possible. We talked about 491. I think it was 491, 487, and 480, like 2 or something, right? We talked about those quite a bit. What my concern was that if you're already above the creek, you don't really want to dump beneath it. So if that were to happen, I'd be a little more like, you know. But until that happens, there's not really anything super crazy going on. So all we're really doing is walking down on the outside of the creek. You jump the creek, you move down a bit. You're iterating on really low volume, coming down. You're finding sellers. This gives you an opportunity to trade more shares in this area one more time. Maybe there's not one more time. Maybe there's more than one more time, right? We don't know that yet. But the point is that whole motion is doing some other things behind the scenes that may not look obvious to us. So number one, if it is a triangle, so again, this is like Booksy Talk, and we're going on top of this creek in a triangular formation, then a Bolkowski target here should get you back up to 512. Well, why does 512 matter that much? It's already been rejected multiple times because of some other things going on, which haven't really been on my doorstep talking about it constantly every single day. So I want to address those things. And a lot of that is also pattern analysis. So you've got this setup where you've got basically a triangular pattern breakout with a possible, I say that very importantly, it's not like a guarantee, nothing's guaranteed in the market, with a possible run up to meet 512, okay? Now, even on the breakout, that could still take time. It's not like it has to go immediately there. There's no rules about that. A lot of times what I'll do is use the, like the middle cat ear or something on a wave. So that would be, for example, just one thing is like using the bottom one, which I just did. The other one would be to, and it's pretty much the exact same, isn't it? It's this guy. So there's not really like a huge amount of deviation here. Like it's pretty much exactly what it looks like. Yeah. I mean, the other one is using like a more direct bottom to top wave and then using the low. I think this is just a way of triangulating the same thing. So to me, it looks like probably 512 sometime this afternoon, if it's going to work, or that's going to be a pivot for a low. We don't know. That's the tricky thing, right? We've been talking about that quite a bit. Is that could be that intersection is actually denoting like where you actually turn back up. So we'll mark it off just to mark it off. But I think that either that's where we're going to kind of pivot on a low wave and head back up, or that's where we're going to meet that top. Either way, doesn't really matter at this point, because we just want to see it continue back above 503, and that's where I'm going to get to on the next point here. So I don't do EMAs every single day. As you guys know, I talk about them quite a bit here and there. Like we'll divulge into an EMA rant every now and then and just kind of talk about why they're important and all that jazz. Sorry I swallowed in front of the mic. That's kind of weird. I was just drinking my coffee. I usually try to back up, but if I get some kind of weird ASMR stuff going on, just know it's not because I'm trying to make weird you out. It was an accident. I'm aware that sounds funky, in especially if you're like wearing headphones or something. You're like, ooh. So why is the EMA on my mind right now? Well, there's a couple that are really important. I'm gonna hide this one right now. I don't think that one's as important. So on the 4 hour, this is super significant. Super significant. So on the 4 hour, there's a 90, all right, and then there's a 180. Okay, I use the 180 and the 90 quite a bit because when you divide them in half, it's really giving you a picture of different time frames. So like, for example, on the 4 hour, if you were to then change it to like 2 hour, you would see that, and it's almost the exact same, so it's kind of confusing, but basically they shift up. Okay, so the 2 hour, the 4 hour becomes a 2 hour, so on and so forth, whatever. You get what I'm saying? Like the 90 on the 4 hour becomes the 180 because it's a division. So there's part of that in my brain like all the time, like, all right, that's part of it. But as you all know, like when EMAs of lower time frame cross up, usually that's a bullish sign. And so we're at this place right now where, I'll be honest, we've never been here before. So you got to keep this in mind. There's some speculation to this, but we've actually never been here before. And you're like, what do you mean? The EMAs have never been this compressed for this long in the history of AMC's chart. Now, have they been this close together before? Yes. But for this length of time, no. Okay? And what I mean by that is, in terms of like how long they've been within, I don't know, 3 cents of each other. Like 4.94 to 4.98, 4 cents. If you want to know where they are now, they're literally like a penny away from each other. They're 4.98 and 4.99. That is crazy. Crazy. So we're pennies away, 2 pennies away from a cross there. Okay? So I've talked about a lot about this compression and then the reactive move here. This is absolutely, in my opinion, still a reactive move. You're like, but Booksy, you just said it was like iterating down again. Yeah, because this is a finishing sequence right here. This is a double M, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a finishing sequence right here that needs to finish in a spring or it's going to dump. All right, 505, that's good. We're going to get to that in just a second. We're not going to miss it. The whole reason I'm on here is because I think we're moving. All right, so don't worry about it. If you're worried about it, we'll get to it. Why do I think 503 is super important? One of them is that it's jumping both of these EMAs. Okay, now I use 4 hour 180, 4 hour 90 because I used to trade on VWAP and 4 hour EMAs. And that was a long time ago, but it was a really effective way to kind of have simple swing trades. And I like that method of trading. I think it's simple enough, and I like those time frames. I don't use the 200 and the 100 like a lot of people. It's not because I'm a hipster. Specifically, there's methodology behind it. I'm not the one that invented that methodology, okay? I just adapted it. So going backwards in time, where are the only other times we've been this compressed? Well, again, we've never been in a 4-cent range for like 3 weeks. That's not a thing. But we have been pretty close before. Now, this first one's going to spook you a little bit, but I'm just going to go back in time. Okay, so this is the closest we've been to a cross without crossing. Now, this is like basically $1 difference, $2 difference. It goes from 43.32 to 41.90. So I guess that's like $1 something and some change. Okay, that's not even remotely as close as we are now. In the grand scheme of things, is it very close? Yeah, but we were consistently that close for a while, and we were not able to break out. Okay, what's the difference with that where we are now? Well, we've been mostly above it. So you notice back here, we're distributing every time we push up above that compression of those EMAs. Like every single time we came above the 4-hour 180, we're distributing. It was almost like a perfect signpost for like, oh, we're distributing. Notice the difference between where we are there and where we are here. Those dips down, remember we talked about that marker at like 485? That's where we met the 4-hour. That 485 has consistently been the 4-hour. See that? Difference is that we're dropping beneath it and recovering back above it. Basically, it's exact opposite of what you're seeing here. Okay? So first I'm going to show you that and emphasize that. Now we're going to talk about the last time that they actually crossed, which was way up here during this kind of squeezing moment that we had in August of 2022. Now, obviously, they weren't the best leading indicators because they basically didn't cross till after they got to the top, which unfortunately would have screwed over a lot of people, right? And they didn't really approach crossing until basically that earnings report. So I'm going to like highlight it really quick. You can see they're still pretty far apart. So this was like a rapid cross and a rapid cross. They basically jumped and then came right back within the course of like a few weeks, okay? There really wasn't much else to say about it except that, okay, well, it jumped, but it was like almost too late, right? The next time they crossed, see, these are really significant. These have not happened very often. The last time they crossed was when they crossed down, and this was when we started breaking down. So this was in December of 2021. But that was from a bullish to a bearish. And then here's the kicker, right? The only other time you see these get compressed and do these kind of loop-to-loop jumps is back here. And then ultimately, they don't actually jump until January of 2021. Now, there are some like fake out, breakout kind of moves, right? Secondary top moves. This kind of reminds me of like my personal thesis on a lot of this, which is this idea of like kind of doing a double top going into that creek and then jumping it later. A lot of people think that you're going to just jump it and head to like 40. And I've been talking about, well, maybe you advance and you get higher than the first one. This is a little bit more similar. But the cross in and of itself happens both times. And in both cases, it's a big push-up. Okay? Regardless of opinions about that, that's very significant. Okay? So that's the first thing I wanted to bring to your attention was this compression where we're basically 1 penny from each of those EMAs. And we've been that way at least within 4 pennies for about 15 days. All right. And now the next one is just purely borrowed from someone else on the Discord who pointed it out that the 200 SMA, not the EMA, but the standard moving average, that the 200 SMA is basically synonymous with our creek right now. So big picture on this one's easier to see why this is important. The 200 SMA is a lot less of a danger, I guess, in terms of like head faking, although it has done it, right? We've done it like 1-2 times before actually breaking here back in 2020. We did it again in August. It's very similar to what we just talked about on that double cross on the 4-hour. Double cross, haha. And then here and here again on these up thrusts, right? And I could go into like what I think about these and what they are and all that stuff, but I'm not gonna do that right now in terms of like iteration and junk. Um, they are where they need to be. They're distributive motions. Okay, so the only time we've really jumped it in the recent 3 or 4 year span that we've been in, really back to until last time we actually jumped this thing was, I mean, 2020 is a decent jump and it lasted a little while. August is the same way, but both of those distributed. Really, not since 2018. The only other one we've had is the 2021 January run up, right? And that's the only big jump we've had. So it's very, 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 very good as a creek, right? And you can see right now, again, strangely compressed right where we are. And this is where things get kind of interesting to me because I'm like, huh. So if this has been like a very, very strong indicator of a breakout, and it's even, in some ways, even more so than that 180-90 thing that I just showed you, this 200 SMA has basically always led to some kind of a breakout move. Almost always. Even if it's like a head fake, you don't jump it unless you're ready to go. When you come back and you look at this area that we're in, and I'm on the daily right now, wick, 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 wick. Then we start changing in the recent time frames, and we're chopping along our creek right now, right? That was kind of like the booksy stuff, like, oh, we're going over above this creek. We're also going above the 200, and we're dancing around it right now. And you can see that it's been brought extremely low. So all of this chop has really been extremely boring, and everybody's like really annoyed with it and all this other stuff. I get it. But what's not happening is we're not dumping. That's one thing. And then also, we're not jumping this 200. The closest we came, interestingly, was August 15th, which was that M-top. Remember the one that I said that, oh, if it jumps here, it could go, but if it doesn't, it's going to come back down. And that's exactly where this is the only place where you have a candle that's almost exclusively on the daily above the 200. But nobody read that apparently as a buy-in. So it was definitely designed to be a sort of a bull trap, right? Because in theory, if that had found support there, it should have just taken off, right? By some measure. So why do you bring the price back down to find sellers? Why do you do sell tests? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? What is a spring for? We already know the answer. The spring is specifically designed sorry, cats are starting to fight. Spring is specifically designed to cross the creek. Okay. So right now, where that 200 moving average is, okay, you can see it on the chart right here. It's at $5, like directly at $5. And I just mentioned $4.99, $4.98 on the 4-hour 180 compressed here also. So you have essentially like a 3-cent range now where basically all you have to do is push it up, find support above them. Frankly, you're kind of good to go. Okay. You can start working your way out. Everything else is like a formality at that point in terms of what I would expect for backups and all that jazz. And this is just a really simplified version of that more complicated chart that I made the other day. This is a way of getting up there by FOMC if you didn't want to run it. So it's a little slow moving. And now you're going to say like, well, that doesn't make sense based on what you just told me. No, kind of doesn't, does it? And that's important because I think that there's hope. Like this is obviously very long-winded going into September. I'm not making this up because I think that it has to wait to FOMC. What I did is I took those iterations. We did it live on stream, and I did the walkout according to the iterations. That's it. Did not do it based on what I wanted to have happen. It was just measuring out halfway points and seeing where it goes, and it basically goes right into FOMC. Okay, so in terms of these iterative walkouts, if it continues to be kind of slow moving, that's what you would see. All right, so all I did was I simplified that on this chart so that I have like a really simple version of that, of what that might look like based on those creek levels, jump, and that's it. So that's what you're visually seeing here on the chart. It's a move up to the 530s followed by 515, a move up to 570s followed by 540s. Okay, 550s. Those levels are non-negotiable to me. Like regardless of if this happens fast or slow, you need to hit those levels. This could happen in a matter of hours for all I care. It could be up, down, up, down, up, down in the course of a day or two for all I care. You know, it has to hit those supports. It does not necessarily have to hit them in this particular order. If it goes a little like more rapid fire, you might see it only go to like 530 and then back down to 515 or even lower. You know what I mean? Like, but those levels themselves are the levels that we've been watching. They're super, super important. And I don't believe them to be like a negotiation point for me. Like if I'm trading it, those are the levels that I'd be looking at, period. So why is it then super significant if you can break back up here? Because it's not just a localized breakout on a wedge. It's not just a finishing of this particular right side, right? That's kind of come from these iterative motions that went into August. It's also specifically a jump over some very, very important moving averages that are hyper compressed, more so than they've been probably ever to some degree. And what's the missing piece of the formula? You already know the answer. The missing piece of the formula is just volume. I mean, that's it. So one of the bigger kind of complaints, again, I've kind of heard it, I've said it myself, is just very, very low volume. But on the big picture, like, it's super important to recognize that most of the time accumulation ends in like a whimper. I've said it before. I said it on the Discord earlier this morning. It just does. It's not usually crazy. And if it's crazy with high volume tops and high volume bottoms and all kinds of stuff, usually that's a sign of distribution, not accumulation. Accumulation almost always ends with kind of a low volume finish that looks like it's going nowhere, that looks pretty relaxed, like somebody doesn't care what happens next kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it just goes, you know, and then it's over. And you're like, okay, I guess it was good. You know what I mean? But there's not a single time, you can go look at them, there's not a single time where it doesn't end that way. Like it's almost always this kind of massive kind of controlled violent walk down followed by like nothing. Like a slow move out and then all of a sudden you're just going. And if that, it's sometimes not even a slow move out. Sometimes it's just going down and the volume's dropping and you're like, okay, what's happening? And then all of a sudden it just goes. So I'm still of the opinion that this looks accumulative. I haven't seen anything that makes me think otherwise just yet. The only thing that might convince me that this is a changed character is if it has some kind of like a massive upthrust here. And I talked about this before anyways. When we did those charts and I showed you guys like the upside down chart, and I talked about coming back up above 520 and then dumping all the way back through this creek, which is a big, big move, right? You'd have to come all the way back up here and then all the way back down through here. That's about the only thing that would maybe make me think this is distributing, because I think you need to have some kind of a violent upthrust before you can distribute. And I think this is proof enough of that. They're trying to enlist sellers and they're just slowly walking it down, very controlled like. So, all right, quick recap, because I know a lot of you guys aren't here all the time. 90, 180, 4-hour, most compressed for the longest period of time I've seen it ever on the chart. Right now they're a penny off from flipping, and that's really important. Those 4-hour EMAs are significant for our advancement. They often mark distribution moments where if you get above them, you're distributing. This whole period of time, it's been at 485, that 4-hour, which means it's been basically the accumulation moment where we're kind of dipping beneath it and not dropping. We did dip beneath it here one more time. Now they're super compressed. If they flip, that's typically bullish. They're only a penny away from each other. The 200 on the 200 SMA standard moving average is dropping down like as if it's our creek right here. It's currently at $5. So we have 498, 499, and 5. 3 really critical EMA crosses, all right there within a 3-cent range of each other. We have a current iteration downward, cattier, that's resulted in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 move. And then also you have a wedge, which has a breakout target of 512, which kind of makes it seem like you're probably going to go if you get up here, because at that point you're now above all those, and we'd have to see what happens with those moving averages. But I definitely think it's very possible at that point you do take a kind of a breather. You know, we might see some sideways again, and then we may advance after that if we can confirm those. So we're at a really important place right here in terms of advancing. Like, we've never been closer. And the only other time I would say we've been this close was last Thursday, and that was probably about it. So, like, we've been at these positions where it's kind of made the move, but it hasn't quite made the move. Like, this one was like sketch as all get out, and I did not like it. I was right to not like it because it wasn't right. And then this one was like maybe, but it has to jump, and that was the Thursday, and that's the one that didn't jump. And so you knew it was going to come back down. So we figured 498 Friday. That happened. I thought we'd probably get some kind of a bottoming here, some type of a spring action. I thought it might pump up first. If you went back to Monday or whatever and looked at it, I thought maybe we would advance again and then drop. But I did think it would come lower. I figured it would make a lower low than that 498. And it did. It didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen, but it happened. It still came down low, which is fine. And I don't really mind it as long as it holds these creeks. It did go back and hit previous support. Some of you are going to say, well, what if it's not over, Booksy? Well, then it's just kind of like a repeat of what I said over here, where you're going to have kind of that quadruple flush motion, right? And I would still expect this to be like a standard, like this is the only other thing I can see right now. That's pretty standard. Like if you wanted to walk it down into Friday, you could do something like that, right? But what about those EMAs? Well, what about them? I mean, on the one hand, they're not always kind of be like perfect indications that you're going to run. There's been plenty of times where we've jumped EMAs and we just don't run. And actually, most of the time in these distribution cycles downward, those EMAs have been more markers for distributors, for the sellers to start distribution. Like the distributions start almost always right above them, right? Lately, the tables have kind of turned, and it's been quite the opposite in this area, I would say. But at the same time, like, just because it jumps it doesn't mean it's going to go right that second. What I'm really looking for is that continuation after jumping. So right now, we've definitely jumped them, you know, all three. Again, 498, 499, and 5. I have to check if it holds all day. I'd have to check and see where they are, because maybe they've changed just slightly, you know, especially if you see that cross on the 90, 180, 4-hour EMAs. That could be very, very significant. Okay. So that's the story for AMC right now. I'm pretty excited about it. And I'm really just waiting to see that volume pick up. I think everything else is going to be basically setting up for that push away from those EMAs, which is good. So GME, haven't talked about that yet. Been going for about 37 minutes now. I haven't even spoken about GME. Well, So GME is a bit of a mixed bag for me because, like, I've talked about this as a support, and it looks like it held support twice, actually three times at 22.37. And now we're kind of freely trading around it, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but in like the grand scheme of things, again, like what was this about? I think this was about trying to find sellers, much like what we see with AMC. Is a lot of times you bring it high to see if you can find enough sellers, and then they make a decision. And I think right here that decision was made to take it back down low. Hence, they pushed it up and then they hooked. They actually double topped yesterday. Well, it was really Monday leading into yesterday. They double topped around 22.78. So the price action refused to advance again, right? Supply takes over and they drop it down. I think that was probably what was going on here with that upthrust. It didn't really look like an upthrust to me, a very low volume. I wouldn't have normally looked at that and said, oh, that's an upthrust, but it's there. And then it failed to advance after. And then you get massive volume, right, coming in to follow through. It did come back and rest its head on a pretty logical kind of trend down. And then since then, it's just kind of worked its way back out. So much like AMC, it's like, well, why would you go low? Well, there's usually only one of two reasons. You're either going low because you're distributing, or you're going low because you're trying to get sellers so that you can do the same thing again, kind of rinse, repeat, and perhaps to jump the creek. So did this jump the creek? Kind of. I'm not really convinced just yet. I think we would need to see it like hold support again above 22.32. And it's getting there. It's at 22.46 right now. So that retreat went back again to a pretty logical place, like at 22, almost exactly. And I think yesterday when we were starting to come down, I said that was one that I would look at as maybe a possible stopping point. There was like three between 22 and like 21.68 that you could stop. I don't really think this is a wedge. I just kind of drew it like that because of the creek and the trend. Okay, a wedge has to have. Well, I mean, this does have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I mean, you could call it a wedge because it has 3 top and 3 bottom hit points, which is probably enough. I think it's a really terrible wedge because of the way it looks, but I mean, technically, it's kind of a wedge, so maybe you could use that. I don't know. Wouldn't normally look at something like this and be like, it's a wedge. It's just that technically it just has to have like the appropriate number of hits on either side. So yeah, I mean, a retracement here at the 62% level gets you back up to basically the top again. So potentially that's where it could end up. Again, typically this doesn't happen like in a direct path, but I would imagine if there's some kind of a market move on the whole, or good quote unquote good news, that might be propulsion enough. Again, same thing, looking for volume for GME. Is it possible this is some kind of LSPY and it's going to drop again? Yeah, I think over time it would be easy enough to see how that's possible. So I drew these parallels upward, and I was wondering, like, the main reason I think these parallels exist is because of that lowest trend. And I've been very like careful not to like pick one of these as most important. That bottom one seems to be the one. And I mean, when it's coming down, it was kind of respecting all of them. So I just kind of ignored, oh, well, I think I could jump any of them, right, and start moving up. But it really hasn't advanced past that lower one, and it's been using it as a channel. So the structure of this M cross as we see it, this jump over the creek, has really been along those parallels coming up. And that's, again, pretty typical. We see this on AMC quite a bit, where it uses like a low trend. It drops beneath that low trend before it crosses the creek. And you're always at risk to some degree, and you can kind of ignore this stuff. This was just me doodling. You're always at risk of some degree to potentially come back down, and hit that creek. And we haven't really done that. It would be a pretty massive drop at this point. I mean, it would be way down here. Basically, it'd be like a double bottom at like 18, which is pretty crazy. Is that possible, Booksy? I don't know, man. Never say never. GME does some crazy stuff. It likes to double bottom. I would say that it doesn't seem likely, but I would never say it's not possible because it's really tough to know, the mind of the operator. And for GME, man, like a double spring kind of deal, like beneath 2050, where it's like basically double bottoming, I wouldn't go so far to say it couldn't happen. That's not even like in my vocabulary on this one. I think there's a serious kind of like sick to your stomach feeling if something like that were to happen. You'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't that be looked at as like a distributive move? I mean, generally, yeah, because you're coming off that top, which was the previous bottom, right? I mean, yeah, it wouldn't look good. But I'm saying, like, in theory, like, if you look at an M cross as it normally appears, yeah, usually you come back down and you check that creek. I would have put it back here. This is where I was earlier in the schematic. I was saying, like, weirdly, before it jumped above 2232, I said, now would be an ideal time if you're going to take it down, to go ahead and take it down. And you can see that intersection would have been, like, perfect. That was an ideal time to do it because you don't lose anything by doing it. You get the creek checks, you get the parallel checks, so on and so forth. Doing it now would be horrible and gut-wrenching, but sure. I'm sorry, like I want to say it wouldn't happen. It's like not possible. It's not possible. That's just not true. It's definitely possible. I don't think probable, I think is a different word. I don't think it's as probable that happens, but it's definitely possible. Okay, we'd have to see some certain things go on here before that kind of a move. And honestly, like I said, I think that dropping beneath this floor is probably enough of a quote-unquote spring action. If the goal is to kind of get his sellers involved and see how much you can sell off to buy back in, then yeah, I don't think it's out of the question that it goes back to like 2150, 2160 area. To me, that's a little more reasonable at this point. It would make more sense. I can see that like reasonably as a place you might come back to based on the way this set up. So if you're like probability hungry and you want to know what's more likely, maybe that 2160s again. I think it's a possibility. Continues to go down. And that would be in the case of like AMC basically failing to move here to any significant value and kind of maybe. All right, I'm just resetting the stream. Above 6? Well, Sergio, that's the big question. So this is not going well right now. For some reason, my stream is like flipping out. I don't know why. This is irritating, huh? It's almost like every time this thing like spikes to like over 100 viewers, which doesn't make any sense because it should not be dependent on how many people are watching. It has nothing to do. I'm trying to fix it, y'all. It's apparently lagging pretty bad. So all right. Well, I don't know what happened, but it's like this happens sometimes on my stream. I'll get like a sudden spike in viewership, and then I don't know if it's like bots or something. I have no idea. and then all of a sudden my stream cuts out. It doesn't make any sense to me because that doesn't make any sense. If you think about the way data moves across the internet, it makes no sense. All right, so there were two questions. One was 6, one was 14. So look, there's a precedence here for both. So I'm going to give you my opinion, but I think that it's a matter of precedence. It's not a matter of opinion. So my opinion is that this should just go. I think it's going to go ahead of the FOMC meeting. I think that it doesn't have to wait. So I know that I've been talking a lot about delaying it because I'm thinking about what an operator may want to do. But the precedence here for going is pretty strong. Like within a matter of like a couple days here, going into Monday next week, you would potentially have a pretty massive move to the upside. And frankly, going from here to 6 is kind of a tough one. Because you don't have to go to 6 directly. 6 is like an SOS value. It's above 596. Like technically you could go to like 598 or 599 and you'd be in an SOS. So the idea of like 6 could be very guarded. You know, the expectation that you're going to run into the money at 6 or something like that, if that's what you're looking for, that's not necessarily like a great expectation because an SOS could advance there and then retreat and it would still be an SOS even if it only hit like 599. So now I'm kind of annoyed. What happened? Sorry guys. I don't know what happened. We went to like 100 viewers and dropped to like 60. And I had a huge crash in internet stuff. I don't know if it was like cause and effect or what. Or if there was any correlation. And I'm obsessing a little bit over it and not talking about TA. I apologize. I just want to make sure the stream is good. There's no point in having a stream if the quality is not there. That's why I'm talking about it. So that being said, it would be really difficult for me to know exactly when it's going to hit there, but there's a lot of trajectories that lead me to believe that 6 could be very, very soon, as in like you break out and you just run straight up there. There's also some that would indicate that you could advance and camp out here for a little longer. This is like a secondary top, but it has to do with something called like the buying climax, right? And the buying climax isn't necessarily your SOS range. So in this particular case, we've got kind of an earlier auto reaction and then a phase B topping area. And there's debate about what those are and blah, 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 blah. I don't want to get too deep into that. But the point is that like that's really in some ways where the main SOS needs to happen. Like your main sign of strength for the breakout should be wrapping around the 575. So if I'm somebody that's looking for a break above 6, I'm not really going to look for that until after that 575 move anyways, which is so close that you're like, well, at that point you're already there. Well, kind of, but that could be quite a delay. You know, you have to consider like where would you want to trade here if you're advancing? You probably don't care too much to trade between here and 550. So you might advance pretty quickly to 550 up to 575 and then camp right there. And that to me is almost a more important SOS than 6. 6 is just above the buying climax, but really the resistance has been here. You see that? So I don't think 6 is going to pose much of a threat. I think the threat is really 550 to 575. So I would not suggest to you to bank on 6 before banking on 550. I think 550 is more important, okay? How quickly could it get there? Very, very fast. Like within a day or two, frankly, from whatever catalyst we need in volume injection or support down here. It could be tomorrow. It could be next Monday. I think it'd be pretty quick. I don't see this as a particularly long sideways action. Last week when we looked at it, you maybe had up until Friday. If you really wanted to delay it at 5 again for a week, I said it was definitely possible. I don't like the idea of it, but obviously I'm not the operator. I'm just looking at the spacing here. It's definitely possible. Okay. The Jackson Hole speech is coming up on Friday. It would not be surprising if this is the Friday, maybe. You guys are like, you've been saying this for weeks. I know. But it would not be surprising if this was the Friday that finally tipped the scales. Where it doesn't actually do the max pain thing where you get a huge injection of volume. All right. That's a 10 a.m. speech Eastern time. So that's pretty early in the morning. Pretty early. Okay. For me, that's 30 minutes ago, but on Friday. So it's a significantly early speech. I don't think that Powell is going to be anything but dovish and then probably again guard his intentions and say it's data driven and they haven't come to a conclusion and blah, 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 blah. So there's going to be a lot of interpretation about what he says. I would be very, very surprised if he just outright said, yes, we're planning on cutting rates in September and confirmed it. I would be very, very, very surprised. I don't think he's going to do that based on his track record. I think he's going to say the same thing he's always said. So there's going to be a whole lot of interpretation about it. And it probably would, if he doesn't come right out and say it, it's probably going to be an excuse to dump the markets one more time. Some kind of major retracement. So again, we'll see where we are tomorrow, Thursday. There's other data coming out this week, inflation data coming out. So far, it's been mostly positive. The one that came out yesterday, fairly positive. There's a few more leading up to Friday. I posted a little diagram in the Discord about it just to show you guys the timing. It was from Unusual Whales. They had a schedule of events or whatever, press releases and junk. I just copied and pasted it. All that stuff is happening this week. I don't think it's beyond us to just kind of chop until then. That's what I'm trying to say. But from a technical standpoint, yes, you are very, very close to a cross, and there is a strong precedence to just advance quickly. Now, the counter argument to that is the work that I was doing on Monday, which is really just to look at these as just kind of blanket iterations. If it's going to take this long every time, how long would it take you to get to the end? And like I said, it's not complicated. In some ways, it's pretty simple. You would hit a peak on the 22nd, you'd hit a peak on the 4th. So there would be a move up into Monday or Friday, something like that, over here, 22nd, 23rd. And then there'd be a potential move up into the 4th, and those would be your waves out. Does that look slow? Well, yeah, it looks kind of slow, as we would see it. In the grand scheme of things, it's not really that slow. If you look at the big picture, it looks like, okay, it's a proper build out. If this were some other chart, I'd probably think that that's normal for AMC. It might seem a little bit slow to us because we're used to AMC kind of breaking and going. So I think there's a strong precedent to just break and go. I also think that the timing for it looks to me to be pretty close to that September, rate cut moment. And maybe that's just a conditional thing. Maybe that's because they're not expecting Powell to come right out and say it. And maybe if there's a surprise, then it changes. You know what I mean? Those are things I can't predict. Maybe this is just the game plan as we know it. Oh, well, it's paced out this way so that it waits to the FOMC for some kind of catalyst move. And then they can do whatever they want to do in the meantime. For 14, two very different ideas here. So one, again, contingent on us moving sooner than later. So early moves indicated that you would hit this 870 pocket, and this would be the whip around to get to that marker. So originally, I had looked at this as a potential whipping point. Does that make sense? That's very different from like us going up the slow route, in which case this is not the whip around slingshot point. This is actually the termination point. So when you use it as the termination point, it's September 30th. So the Glenn Millers of the world will be, see you in October, you know. Sorry, I shouldn't be a mocker. But that's the truth of it, is like technically, like if it waited until the 13th or whatever, the 11th to the 13th of September, you could have a 2-week run up pretty easily. And the levels are simple enough. Like there are the same levels that I've been marking off the whole time. Nothing's really changed. It's just the way in which you advance would be different. So instead of this being kind of the middle slingshot point, this would be the high point. You see the difference? How do you know which is which? I don't know which is which, because in past models, both could be argued as possible. Like there was a move in March where this really indicated, a lot of these markers indicated, depending on how you drew them, if you drew them correctly, they indicated like the slingshot. They didn't indicate the top. It was like the 50% marker on the curve. So this was like the center. It's the center versus being something else, right? But this is like the center of the wave. And then there's other examples, like if you look at June, that one's a little more like this, where you have those cat ears kind of representing where you're going to hit the center mark of those. That wave here indicates kind of where you hit the top region. And it's even, in that case, it's even kind of a mixed bag because you kind of go above it. So I went through a lot of different methods to kind of determine when and where we hit that 14. My conclusion is this, okay? And I'm going to just say it as simply as I can. If you're trying to catch a big move, just be smart about it. Don't be dumb. Don't bet on a weekly that's on, September 6th when FOMC could cause a delay. I mean, it's that simple. It's if you're just trying to like catch the bus and you're not trying to like get some kind of crazy huge return because you think you have to or something, it's not that hard to catch the bus. There's no reason to go that close. It just doesn't make any sense. I can't tell you what to do with your money. You do whatever you want to do. When I traded back here in May, I got mostly long-term leaps, and I got a couple, like not a lot. I mean, it wasn't like a couple. It was a little more than that. But I got a handful of very, very short-term contracts. But that's it. I was heavily leveraged long. I didn't lack confidence in the move. I felt like the move was going to happen. It's more about the principle of protecting your money. And if something doesn't go your way, like, for example, I don't know, the news doesn't hit that needs to hit, and the operator decides to play patty cake with the other operators, and drive the price sideways for 2 weeks, you're not sitting there complaining every single day that your calls aren't hitting. It's like, look, man, it was your decision to make. You have the opportunity to be smart about it, so be smart about it. And you're going to make money. I'll tell you this, if you're doing options, you're going to make money if it runs up to 8 or to 14, to $9 or to $15, whatever it ends up being. You're going to make money if it's a leap. You're not going to like lose anything. And you could give yourself 6 months of padding, And that way, if it doesn't do what you think it's going to do, you're not losing an arm and a leg every time, right? A week goes by or whatever. I can't give you guys perfect financial advice ever. I'm not allowed to do that. I wouldn't presume to do that. But I can tell you, like, to not be stupid. I think that's a fair enough general statement, to be smart about it. Use your intelligence. You have intelligence. Use it. Don't act like a nincompoop who thinks that every week it's going to explode to the upside. it's been frustrating because every week there's been some kind of a setup that demands like you could go, or it says like, well, maybe you could go. Especially back here, this was the most frustrating area for me. You know, get a grip, right, Booksy? You know, during that week and a half period right here, I get it. I get it. I get your frustration with it. I do. But if the goal was to kind of catch the knife or to try to find the perfect moment, I think it's fairly evident that with this particular setup, like this is as good as it's going to get right now. And I don't think even right now I would put it past us to just do some more delaying. So that just goes to say like this is the way that this particular setup is right now. All right. I could easily see this being delayed out to next week again. And you're like, well, what about the week after that? Look, every time they push the creek, okay, which is what they've been doing, every single time the operators, the market on the whole, the price action, whatever you want to call it, okay, every time it pushes the creek, it generates another creek. Like it's basically raising that level. So you see what happened is like we pushed the creek on that Thursday, we didn't advance. When you do that, it's like I was kind of joking in the Discord. I said, this is what I would name this chapter of the book, is how to waste time, how to give yourself more time in the market. This is it right here. You advance the creek and then you retreat. And what that does is it gives you a breath of air, basically. You're allowed to now go, I say allowed to, but now you can play your little game down here for another week. So you understand, like, it's frustrating, I get it, but like every time they've kind of pushed these creeks and then dropped way back down, they're giving themselves like 3 or 4 more days. It's a lot. When is it going to break though? It has to break eventually. Yeah, I think it's really close, but I don't think it's happened just yet. I think today is probably the closest we've been, again, aside from Thursday, and I think that it's very likely based on the setup that you might see again that kind of push. But notice that if it goes up to 512 and it doesn't immediately run, what have you done? I'll tell you what you've done. You've now generated like a new creek. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, when is it ever going to end, Booksy? I don't know. It ends when it ends, right? When you finally break out and take it back above 520s, which is what ultimately we've been talking about this whole time anyways. I mean, at the end of the day, like this has maintained the same exact point every single time. It's these cliff levels, right? These drop-off levels that we had at like 526, for example, and stuff like that. Like those are the levels that we've yet to get to. So the confirmation's not been there, period. Like it's never been there, you know? So again, you're like, well, how could you keep delaying it? This is how you keep delaying it, you know? You keep driving the creek up a little bit higher, and then you drive the price back down. And before you know it, it's like, oh, okay, well, now I've got as much time as I want to have, you know, another week. It's not complicated. It's super simple. If you remember basic geometry, remember rise over run, right? That's the idea of slope. How far up, how far sideways. Think about it as like fall over run. Like how far does it fall and now how far do you have to run? Because now you could take that, your sweet fat time, you know, going sideways, and you're not at risk of even pushing the resistance again. That's the nature of the creek. What's amazing is that they did this for a really long time on that 200 SMA, like a really long time. Like they started doing it kind of pushing back on July 8th. Remember that day we were talking about that was the chance you could have an advancement and it didn't advance, distributed. It's weird looking back on it now because I wasn't looking at the 200 as like the key thing or something. Like I didn't feel like that was necessarily the case. But isn't that funny how it's like right there, you know, in the background? There's always more than one thing you could look at, you know. And then we just been riding it down, iteration, change of character. And no, I'm not going to let that go. If you guys are wondering how long I'm going to talk about that change of character, I'm not going to let it go. Because it's so important that to me that we were able to measure where that changed character here. It's so significant. Like I can't even emphasize that enough. Like it's so significant because in the grand scheme of things, like that's going to be the day that August 9th, August 12th date, like that's going to be the day that I'm thinking about. Even at the end of this move, I'm going to be thinking about that change of character because that's the time that, in my opinion, like for me, like that's catching it. You know what I mean? Like you catch the change of character, you're catching it. You're catching on anyways. You may not have the bottom, but you've caught on. You know, so it's a huge deal, and that's when it finally shifts and starts jumping the 200 right here. Big deal. We were hugely disappointed that it didn't just rocket, but I knew, like part of me knew that it was just going to be working itself out, and we would have to see what happened. And I'm happy to say that I think it has, and it's going that way. So today should be a really interesting day, period. I'm curious to see if we go back beneath any of those other EMAs again, specifically 499. I don't think we will. If we do, it's going to be like a double bottoming kind of thing right here, like going back, checking a creek or checking that support maybe at 496. I would venture though, and I'm just going to say it, I would venture a guess that I don't think you're going to come lower again. I've said this before. You guys are like, well, you've been talking about GME and maybe dumping to Hades here. Like, why couldn't AMC do that? I guess it's always possible. But if you look at where the creek is, it's like, it's not where it is on GME. GME is like super steep. AMC is just not. It's just not. Like, if it drops straight down to the creek right now, it might be 492. I mean, it's a penny off from the previous bottom. Even here, like going down to 493, you're like, well, that's low. Yeah, but that's not lower than 479, right? Like, we haven't made any new lows still. We're still in this mode of like walking across and finding support. It'd be really weird to me if we pumped up and then came all the way back down. And some of you are like, yeah, but there's that penny gap, like 483. What if we jumped up and then came all the way back down? I guess that would be a similar situation as like this idea of like going up and then dropping back through. I don't know. Maybe you could make that argument that AMC could do something similar where it pumps up. I don't know how high it would go, but maybe like that 513 and then came back to, I don't know, 480 something. I'm not saying that's not possible. I don't want to say it's not possible, but I'd be willing to venture a guess anyways, as long as there's follow through. You guys are like, well, that's a stupid thing to say. That's like contingent on something you don't know that's going to happen. I know. So maybe I shouldn't even bother. What I was going to say is I would measure this as like a bottom for potential buy-in is what I was saying. For myself, like that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at it as, yeah, it could go down again, but I'm probably not going to be able to trade it anyways if it does. So, meaning like I think it would be some kind of rapid fire dump and pump kind of thing if it does happen, which I'm not going to try to catch. So this to me, while the volatility is still pretty low, this is probably the bottom that I want the most right here. So in this region, really between 496 and 510. This is the range that I'm going to be looking for, like a breakout, you know. This is where I want to see it. I'm a little bit nervous about that creek jump. I think it's okay. It backed up a little bit. I think it'll be all right. Yeah, and an advanced higher here than this drop off. I kind of don't want it to go just yet. I kind of want it to come back down a little lower and then go. Because that would be a good place to find support here before trying to take off to the upside. but I guess it doesn't really matter too much. Could happen later. Point is, this is where I would kind of watch and see. I'm going to check these EMAs closer to the end of the day. I'm going to turn them off right now. I don't really want to see them on the chart all the time. So this is the region that I'm looking at here. Let's make that like a different color. So I think I answered your question. I think that 6 could be really, really close, but I would actually watch 575 more than 6. And then just to recap, and then 14, it's just a big gamble. It could be very, very soon. I think if you get an early run up, early advancement, you're talking about within the next, probably before September. I'll just say that. I think the first target was like the last week of August into the first week of September. And then unfortunately, like if it takes the long route through mid-September and we don't break out until then, I don't see it going up till basically the end of September, like it being at 14 at the end. So it's a month off, and that's a huge deviation. You know, and there's going to be probably some questions from your end about why, you know, certain things changed. Why did I change my chart again? This and that. You just throwing spaghetti at the wall, Booksy. Well, to some degree, yeah. I mean, when you're doing TA, it's okay to say like you don't know what's going to happen. That's just you being realistic and saying like, well, there's possibilities here that things could be delayed. And like I know how they would do it. And even if I said like, yeah, that's the end of the iteration, it should work its way out. It is working its way out. And I don't really care if people don't believe me or if they think that I'm crazy because it came back down and they were expecting it to rocket or whatever. Like I know what this is. Like I know what that is. It's a double top, a quadruple top really, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're looking at this as an accumulation range, you know. So be it. You know, you came back to that area near the drop off. You just need to get back above 505. The EMAs are in the right place. You've jumped the major creek. You're not breaking back below it significantly. You're just testing it. Everything about it is like an outworking. It's not like these clear iterative moves down. So to me, I'm like, yeah, I'm comfortable in that. I get that some people are going to say they don't agree or whatever, that I'm just making stuff up to make myself feel better or something. But if you were here and you watch me map the iterations, I think you'd be on the same page as me. So GME is a little weirder for me. I just think the strangeness of the move kind of puts into question, you know, what's what. I do think that in the overall picture here, like I would probably expect there to be some kind of a retracement to 2231. I know it's a little odd because it's like, well, we already checked it, so why would we need to check it again? I don't know if you recall when we did the wave here, it's actually really similar. We talked about it might come back up and then need to come back down. It's funny how it still did the same thing. It just did it like super extreme, like, but this is the way I drew the wave, like when we were talking about it on like Thursday last week. Remember that? And I was like, oh, well, it could come back up and then not advance and then come back down again and retest. And it's very strange how we did that, but we did it to like an extreme degree. Well, part of that is the final check, you know, the final level check. And that's more typical than not. So most of the time you do get that kind of test where you're going to come back and double check that bottom one more time. I know it's like, how many times do you have to check it? Well, every time you break below it, you're kind of turning it from a demand into a supply. So it makes sense to check it every time you come back above it. You know, it's that simple. So if you were to drop below a level like that and then you're advancing back above it, I'm not saying it has to, because there are times where it just doesn't. It's been checked enough, but most of the time, just probability wise, you're going to check it. As the market wants to make sure that that is support. And usually that's a good place to say, you know, put an order in or whatever. If you see that check happen, it looks strong. So I would expect GME to come back to test 2232. And it might be slightly higher because when we came down, that level was not 2232. It was actually, like, I know that's the right level, but there's like a range here. There's a lot of hit points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, distinct, 6, 7, 8. These aren't all the same. It's basically that pocket here. So maybe it'd be better to say 2235, not 2232. The reason I kept 2232 is because it was the bottom over here. So it may not need to actually hit that low. It may only need to go down to like 2235. Because there's a big range kind of picture, and then there's sort of like what happened on the short term. In the short term, it did not go that. So you can see that marker right there. The short term, it didn't actually go that low when it came. It did 2 tests on 2235. So yeah, maybe right there. Well, I guess we'll see. So I'm kind of happy it's actually coming back down right now. That's a good thing. You'll notice I'm like looking at IWM, but I have Doge on the chart. So Doge broke one of my levels. I'm not a huge crypto trader. It's weird. It's like I have a crypto account and I've got a decent chunk of money in it, not like a huge amount. But I got a decent chunk of money in crypto. I just don't really monitor it ever. So I basically buy crypto like I would like a bank, where if it has like a return, so I'll do like Ethereum and stuff, which has like a yield. It yields interest yield, so it's better than a bank's rate. And then I've got some of the bigger ones. And I did have some Doge, but I didn't really have a lot. So what I did is I converted a lot of these kind of secondary crypto offerings that I have, and I made them Doge. So I am in it, you know, not extremely in it, but I'm in it. And I think that this late August, September move is very similar to what we might see on GME. So again, contingent a little bit on maybe what happens with FOMC and stuff, but I see this as a very positive potential sign. I don't think, again, it's out of the question that it could have another drop, come back down again, maybe even to test as low as 9, but it's there as a potential bottom. And I think it's got a really strong chance of making a pretty significant run up, about double in value within the next month. Potential, that's the key word. Nothing in the market is sure. So I had that indicator on my chart just to let me know if the alert, just to let me know if what's what. And it broke. So I'm going to monitor it, but I'm going to stick with it for now, which is kind of unusual. I don't really talk about crypto very much on here at all, unless someone asks about it. IWM. So I don't know what to say except this is Bukowski's target. It was not mine. So the 215 made a lot of sense to me, so I used it. I used Bukowski to generate that target based on the triangular bottom and that potential breakout. And it was a 215 target. Technically, it's 215.36, and it hit there like almost perfectly. So really, really clean, really good target. Not easy to trade because in this case, unfortunately, it was hard because it jumped over and it didn't immediately like advance. So that was tough because it could have been like a head fake, and we watched it, and I watched it really carefully last week going into Wednesday, Thursday, Um, but it was like we were waiting to see if it was gonna hold, and it did hold. But I don't know if it would have been like an easy buy-in. I think you would have had to kind of take a leap and say, okay, well, it held the creek, so I'm going to buy in, that kind of thing. Or if you already were in because you were bullish. So I personally did not trade it, but I would have been a bit hesitant to trade it. I would have maybe gotten a little bit and then hedged or something because I wasn't really sure. Like it kind of held the creek, kind of didn't. It was just very odd. And then it just had this massive gap up, which is always tough to read because you don't actually see the breakout again. We didn't see it going into Thursday the 15th, but the move is all there, which is great. It hit the target that it was supposed to hit, which is great. So, in terms of like pattern trading, it's a win. And I think that's a positive. It's not always going to be the case, but in this case it was. So it, at this point, goes without saying it's already up here, but I think that you want to just maintain that 212.50 if you don't want to go lower, probably as low as like 211.70 would be better. But the wave has already kind of crossed down here. So in terms of like whether or not this could break down, I don't think it's imminent, but I think it's imminent that this is a range at this point. Once it does that cross down, you've entered into like a ranging territory where you're going to start going sideways. So there's a bit of space here before you hit the, it's almost looking like it might do the same exact thing in some ways. We might get another little wedge here, but it's got a little bit of room before it hits that trend. So it could be, again, one of those things that you're waiting until Friday. I think it's very possible that this could form out very similar to what we saw here. Maybe some kind of a rising triangular motion, up to Friday. I would not necessarily expect it to break out early unless there's some kind of like a catalyst on it. So I'm going to be watching it pretty closely. If on the off chance it does come down below 211.80, 211, what's the actual number, Booksy? 211.60, that could be a breakdown. And from that point, you've got gaps galore downward to 207. There's also like a series of tops that we never checked, and I've been really bothered by this because we're just not checking them, and there's like a ton of them. So really any of these could act as a support. And I hate to just like add more lines, but there's just a ton of potential tests that we haven't tested. Like we just haven't checked them yet. So these are supply drop levels that have yet to be checked as support. So quite a bit there, It's a range. It's just a range that we just keep avoiding for some reason, and I don't really know why. Couldn't tell you. I'm like a head-on kind of guy. I'd rather just see it happen, you know what I mean, than to kind of like beat around the bush. I don't really like that idea. But for some reason, like we're just not, we're not trading this range like at all. And I don't really get that. This is sort of like saving it. I don't know. I thought when we came back down, I thought we would be there. I thought that made the most sense to me because it's like, well, that's where you need to find support. Why would you not go there? Instead, we've kind of made deliberate efforts to not go there, which is very strange. Like, it could not be any clearer that we are avoiding that area. You know what I mean? It's like, why? What are you waiting for? I don't know, man. Maybe there's something with like just market theory or something like I just don't understand. I feel like I've seen this before where we avoid like a level right above a range for some reason. Like I know AMC's done that at times where it's left like a gap open. But typically if it does that on the way down, on the way back out, you're going to check those levels Like they end up being like retracement levels or something, you know? It's not typically like they're fib levels or something, you know, and you end up come back and you're, instead of being below it, you're on top of it. And then it ends up becoming a support instead of being, you know, a resistance. And those are things that I'm used to because you see that on AMC when it drops, it leaves these little like liquid gaps at potential fib levels. And then later when it comes back up, it may fill those gap levels. It's pretty rare. It does happen on AMC, I guess, here and there, where it just kind of avoids an area altogether. I really couldn't tell you why. I wish I knew. It probably has something to do with the way liquidity is explored, and it's not necessarily a desire to like, I mean, maybe in this case it's the desire to conceal a form of confirmation, like we're not getting the confirmation, so people are left in the dark. But maybe also part of it is just there's just not a lot of liquidity there. I mean, we don't really know. So there's not a lot of desire to trade there, then it's hard to say. Maybe it's just like a through lane, you know. They don't want to trade sideways in it because most of the people are either buying through it or selling through it. There's this little game that my son and I got. I can't remember the name of it. Arlix or something like that. And it's like a little real-time strategy game. You play like these planets. And it's really good for being so simple. It's a really, actually very difficult game. Very quick. It's really hard, really fast. And, but it's fun. And you just move these little, it's pretty cheap too. You just move these little units around and grow planets and then attack other planets. And you're trying to just you know, defeat the enemy or whatever. But they have these levels where they change things up. And one of them has like these conveyor belt kind of things where you have to move through them. You can't really sit in them. They like automatically move your units through. And I know that's a weird thing to talk about right here on a stock stream. You're like, well, that's great. So it's a video game, Booksy. Well, I don't know. That's not really what I'm saying. I guess it's like those airport pads, you know? You're in the airport and you just like, it's like pushing you through it, and you can't easily like stand still on them. You'd have to like walk in reverse or something. Maybe that's kind of what's going on here. Like the direction that you enter it at this point is sort of like pushing you through it, you know, and it's hard to kind of maintain trading there. That could be part of it. Maybe that's why they jumped it with gaps and other stuff, you know. I don't know. I think it's really odd. So maybe there's just too many orders there or something, and it's kind of the opposite. It's like too many one-way orders, and so it just kind of propels you through it because people know that it's a key level. That's another. Maybe it's the opposite of what I'm saying. Maybe it's not a lack of liquidity. Maybe it's like too much, so you can't sit there long. Well, the 22 price target, I've heard that before. I've heard 20s, I've heard 40s. I found that price target as well. I don't think that it's as likely to me. So I found 22 early on, really early on. It was one of the first ones. I don't know if you guys recall, but it was like 18 to 22 or something like that. And I was very conservative and said 18. More often than I said 22 or 20. But there was an idea that it could get there. But I've been very dependent on creeks, and I've been very dependent on what I see as a resistance line. And I don't think that at this point it's come significantly lower, but I don't think it's also still at 20 something. So that would suppose that the downward or the sideways action hasn't resulted in any change. And if anything, you're just going to go higher. In some ways, I get that, because like P&F would dictate that you could go quite high. But we also don't know. A lot of times with point and figure, people assume that it's just adding to whatever your original target was. That's not really the case. You may have been off. Your original target may not have been supported by like a point and figure count. If you don't know what point and figure it is, you can look it up. It's a pretty accurate way of determining cause and effect in the market. Again, this idea of like the run versus the rise, like a triangulation of data. And we found that there was a similar way to do it with the methodology I use, which is those banked S-curves. And it ended up being very accurate for price target runs. So I don't know, like I understand where people are coming from, but at the same time, I don't think that often I think the idea is like, well, if you originally had 22 Booksy, why, if it's taken longer, this is the counter argument for myself, right? The devil's advocate. Why, if it's taken longer, would you lower your target? That's a good question. Part of that for me is like momentum. I don't think that momentum's been killed with sideways action. But if you looked at cause and effect, I'm pretty sure that early on there wasn't enough of a cause to continue upward. Like the original cause was only to get you to like 13. And then once that's exhausted, there's really no, from a point and figure standpoint, not from like a wave, not from momentum, not from nothing else, okay? Not from volume. Just point and figure by itself, I would be like willing to bet money on it that if we went back and we looked at when we called out 22, I almost guarantee you that no point and figure analysis would have shown that that's a likely target. The likely targets back then were probably like $7 or something, because we hadn't really gone sideways long enough in order to build up a cause that would get you that high. So it's like, what I'm trying to say is like, we're often really bullish because we just want to be really bullish. And there's ways of like understanding bullish price action on AMC that might transcend stuff like a point and figure chart. But I'll be honest, like I don't feel like it's ever really been wrong. Back when Stockfather and I used to do stuff together, he would use it. He wasn't the best at it, but he would use it. He'd work hard to like see what it was, and then he would tell me, and it's never like as huge as you think it's supposed to be, you know? It's like a point and figure here may only get you to like $8 or $9, or may only get you to like $10 or $12, you know? You assume it's going to be this ridiculously long thing, but that's not really the case. If you go back to, and we did this again on stream, we measured it out. And it just so happens that the way that I was understanding those S-curves being banked ended up giving us a really accurate target, like nearly perfect target for this run up. But it didn't exceed it. It went up to like right at the top, which used to be like 33, 34. Now it's 182. But the point and figure here was very similar. This is one of the first places that I was introduced to that. And Stockfather did the point and figure for it, and it was like just as close as my predictions were, if not closer. I think it was like 34. So the distance traveled versus the run-up was really to here. And that determined like how far, before you broke out, right? Before you broke out of that creek, how far would you go? Well, that's a pretty significant move, you know, but you also have to look at how long did that take? So this idea of like, oh, it's got to run up to 22, I get the bullishness of it. This is a 50-day trading zone. You know, it's a significantly long time. And it yielded, at least from the breakout, you know, like 120%. Now the ratios aren't going to be perfect. There's other things you have to count with point and figure, because it also has to do with somewhat with downside as well. There's a little bit more to it. But you know, you look at something like this and you're like, well, how long has this been trading sideways? this is significantly longer in some ways. It's like 100 days. So it's like twice as long, right? So, we could look at that and then we could go to a point and figure and see if we could figure out like how far, could it go. That's a 200% move just to get to 15. So like, could it go higher? Maybe. Again, I'm not like going to sit here and pretend like it's not possible. But in just doing like the count, based on what I saw, I don't see it going way beyond 15 to maybe 18. That's a 250% value right there. That's significantly high. So for someone to say it's going to run another 300%, that's a huge, huge move. Huge move. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say that it can't happen. All I would say is that that's beyond the creek. So at that point, it changes quite a bit. So for me, it's like maybe that time is spent in order to make the move possible. And originally we thought like it could just go right back up here. Maybe there wasn't enough fuel in the tank for that kind of move initially. A lot of that was exhausted. So then you're resetting, everything. And technically, like the sell-off didn't stop till here. So again, point and figure, it does have to do with sideways, but it also has to do with how long you're going. This is really more like 75 days because the sell-off didn't really stop till here, and then you're reaccumulating. So it's really like a 75-day area, not a 100-day, which is what I grabbed. So even less so, I just don't think it has enough gas in the tank to push all the way up to like 40 or something like that. But those were levels that, I said early on, I was like, sure, we can get there. But then looking back on it, I'm like, meh, do I think we're going to jump this creek right now? I don't think it's time yet. So I just don't really have a lot of reason to believe that it would go way beyond maybe 16, which was kind of one of the original targets that I had, was like $14 to $16. That was a long time ago. And then when we first ran up to 13 something in after hours, I said that was the first target. I'm going to count that as my first target. The second target, maybe like 16 or 17. That hasn't really changed. I mean, every time I do targets for this, they're always grouped here, like this pocket region. They're never like significantly higher. They're never like significantly lower. They're always in like the same little region. And I think it makes sense. Like, why would they not be? This is where the ceiling is, right here, So I'm not against the idea of running farther. I don't really care if you like someone's target better than mine. I get it. I would just say, like, be realistic about it. If you think you can do it, then, go for it. It's your choice to trade. I think personally, if it's going to go, it needs to have a huger, kind of longer sideways action. I think the hole here should be considered as well. And that's another thing, is like, we made the argument a while back, and I'm just talking about big picture stuff because the price settled down. It's at 5, it's at 0%. I made the argument a while back that we may very well iterate back down to 3. And I think a lot of people are like, that's never going to happen. That can't possibly happen, so on and so forth. What about elections? What about this? What about that? Look, I think there's plenty of good arguments against that idea. I'm not ignorant of that. I really am not. I even originally didn't think it was going to do that either. I imagine maybe we come back to like 6 and then come back up, and 6 is like kind of the regular floor. But the fact is if you look back at historically what happened here, this is a really long accumulation. It's 10 months. Now, this again might beg the argument, well, we've been down here longer than 10 months. Yeah, but a lot of that was selling off. A lot of that was seller driven. There was accumulation here, and I think we've seen the resulting action from that pressure buildup. That was the measurement just given on the basis of these falling S-curves. But notice that like we spent a huge majority of our time just kind of chopping beneath and iterating beneath. Yeah, I mean, it's just too easy for me to see this doing something really similar. That's why I'm hesitant to say it's just going to rocket. Like I could see this happening where we are now presently, especially with the gaps and stuff that we've left, that this is sort of what we're doing. And we're going to mark up, kind of like we did here, you know, in grandiose fashion, of course. But I could definitely see this being very, very, very similar with regard to how it kind of moves across a bottom, you know. And I asked the question, like, well, why not? You know, there's a precedence for it. This range right now that we're in is beneath the floor. That's another thing. It's like, look at where that area is. So the idea of going to like 20 is breaking out. I mean, that's what people are saying when they're saying we go to 20. It's like, okay, well, are you saying we go all the way up to like the middle of this range? And then what? It's hard for me. I think if we went up to 20, it changes a lot. I'm just kind of analyzing it as I go on the fly here, but it does change a lot. I mean, this area right here around $20 is like the middle. It's a middle 50%. You could distribute from the center of another range. That's not out of the question. It doesn't happen very often, but you'd be in the other range, you know? And then it's like, I guess this is where you'd have to kind of draw the conclusion that you're going to come back down and test that floor. You'd have to come back to like 11 or 12. You'd have to. You can't just like go. You'd have to check this level, and that's the creek, you know? So, I mean, like, it's the difference between saying like we do or we don't jump the creek. To me, it's like pretty clear. That's the bigger difference here. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm not trying to make it sound like it can't happen or something like that. I understand where people are coming from. I can find those targets. It's not complicated. I mean, it's not to diminish anyone else's work or disparage their work. I'm just saying I know it's there. Like, I'm aware of where they're getting it from. I can find those targets through different methodologies and stuff. They're there. But this is a pretty significant claim because you're basically saying that this is probably what you think is going to happen, you know, and that it's going to jump this creek. We've just not done that yet. So I'm having a lot of problems imagining it happening in this way for a number of reasons. But I suppose elections, if that's enough of a thing, you could suggest that this is the way it needs to go, and that, you know, this waveform idea is a bunch of nonsense, and it doesn't actually need to take that long. It could go right back up. I could find those targets. Here's one right here, you know, $40 for January. And this is closer to like what I originally kind of envisioned anyways, was like you'd come up to 40 and then chop down, and then later on come back up to like 80 or 90 in the following year. It's kind of some early analysis stuff. But when I re-examined it later, I don't want to say I convinced myself, but I kind of convinced myself that this is probably going to be like this, where it's a double topping action. And when you look at the daily RSI, you could just see it, you know. It looks very similar to what we experienced back here. Not before the run-up, but the run-up, you know what I mean? It looks really similar to this, but it's just like a smaller version of it. And that makes me think we're going to iterate the same thing again here. And I think, frankly, like with 30 million shares, they have plenty they can start selling off all the way back down and drive the price, maybe more than that. Vanguard, they're going to have enough ammunition to do whatever they want to do, you know. I don't agree that it's some unstoppable force, you know. That's just never been my opinion. So the MOAS or retail buying or whatever. And I don't know why you would think that, because like right now, it's taking very little volume to kind of sit still. If retail really wanted it to go up and had the power to make it go up, we would be going up right now. It's that simple. It's taken almost historically like no volume to just kind of sit do nothing. And that just goes to show how little, in my opinion, that's like, it's evidence right there. This is how little you can actually affect the change of the price. And when an operator just kind of steps to the side and again plays patty cake and just waits for the ping pong ball to come at them and knock it back, it doesn't take almost anything to do that and just kind of keep it flat. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, sure, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and some of you guys are going to be like, well, that's not true. They got to manipulate this and this and this and FTDs. And yeah, I know. But I just mean on the surface level, volume. It's very evident that it's not taking a whole lot of volume to do any of these things. So, yeah, so I don't think that it's new. It's not even a question in my mind. Like, I think that it's totally possible. This is just another iterative action. We're experiencing that downward motion that, like we did back here, iterating until we break out, and then we'll run hard. But based on the way the setup is built out, I don't think we're going to run. And I think this is an oddity too, is I think that some folks are probably looking at this like it's all the same. And that's another thing that's difficult, because I'm a fractal person in some ways. Like, I have a very deep understanding of those things. I really do. But I also think that I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot and say that I don't. But I think that the nature of understanding this versus this is really critical as well for your interpretation of things. I think some folks probably interpret this downward motion as this downward motion. I've seen that before. I've seen that comparison. They don't see it as like a distinction. So for those folks, they're like, well, the resulting action is this and then this. And this is just showing you what then? Because why would this be positioned in like the middle of the range? I mean, that's the kind of the strange thing about that presumption is, like, if it's now you're expecting a January move, but it didn't stay high. You know, it didn't break above. It did break the creek, but it didn't ultimately like. So it's just like, why would you expect the next move to now be the exact same as this one? It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, I don't get it. Proportionally, this is stuck beneath 14, you know? So what I see it as is that it's like a micro iteration of the whole. Like, I think that what we're experiencing is this whole thing. We're experiencing it like really rapid fire down here. So I think we'll come back above this top, just like we came back above the kind of these breakdowns early on. I think we'll come back above that, but I think that's right here. I think that's right where it should be. You know, these tops. Up here around 14. I just don't see the argument that it would go farther. I don't know. But I'm open to it. Yeah, and I think that there's a gentle critiques about me providing like trading opportunities and stuff like that. You know, I agree, like on the whole, I don't tend to do that very much, mostly because I don't want people to buy or sell stuff based on what I'm saying. I think it's your own decision to make. And I'll sometimes tell you like how I would trade something, and sometimes I do trade it. Like, I've done live trading on this stream before to some degree where I'm like talking about entry and exits, and I'll let you know if I make a trade and what that trade looks like, and that's just me sharing. I'm not telling you what to do. But yeah, it's ultimately up to you to decide. So I think for charting purposes, I'm comfortable like where I'm at, and providing what information I do provide. And I'm not going to look to give you guys like perfect trades every time. There's other people on YouTube and other places that do that, and they do a pretty good job. You know, they'll try to give you entries and exits perfectly and give you like stop losses and all that stuff. I find it to be a bit subjective because at the end of the day, like, if you're just looking for someone to teach you how to trade, there's so much information out there. Like, anybody could go and just find that information for free about stop losses. I mean, just Google it. You'll find billions of results, you know? I mean, there's so much, and a lot of it's just subjective. It's like, what are you comfortable with? How do you set a stop loss? Where do you set it? Well, it ultimately boils down to what your risk factors are and stuff like that. When do you enter? Risk factors. Do you enter early or do you enter on confirmation? You know, if you think I'm not giving you trades, you're probably not listening very carefully, because I talk about something called confirmation, and that to me is like the trading moment, you know. And so I'm giving you like targets, and I'm giving you those confirmations. Like, that's pretty much it. That's the trade. But I can't tell you what to do with that information. Or guarantee that the results are going to be what you want every time. But me saying this was a change of character over here, yeah, I mean, nothing's really changed since then. In terms of price action, you might not think very much has changed, but it has changed. Like, so the determination that that change of character happened over here, to me, is not, it is a charting phenomenon, but it's also like, that's for trading purposes. And like, now I'm in an active trader mode. Like, I'm no longer just sitting back waiting for this to finish. And you could swing trade it, but if you weren't swing trading it, now I'm waiting for that confirmation, and that's it. That's all I'm waiting for. And then I fully expect upside. So, yep. And there's a flip side to this too, which is people that are frustrated that they're not making money because it's not going up above 5 or whatever number you want it to go above. You have to remember, like, sellers are out there too. They're not making bank on this either. There seems to be a thought that only buyers are suffering in this. That is not true. That's not true at all. Like, that's the farthest from the truth you could get. It's kind of like the opposite of true. It's just, you know, false. A seller's been trying to do their best to sell the tops, you know, open sell positions and highs. Buyers have been doing their best to open buy positions at the lows. But at the end of the day, like, we had bears in here, like a few bears in here that were talking about this thing dropping to 3. They were talking about that back here on the 12th as well. So while we've been talking about, for majority of us are bulls, not everybody has to be bullish, and you could be bearish if you want. I'm not against that idea. But if you're a bull, like we've been talking about breaking out in like 6s and 8, 9, and then going up to 15 or whatever. Y'all, the bears have been talking about the same thing for the last month and a half. They've just been talking about downside. They didn't get what they wanted either. So I'm just saying, like, the idea that it's only bulls who are suffering is nonsense. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. We know there's been a few bears in here that have come in and been like, it's going to go to 3, it's going to pump up, and then it's going to drop down to 3, and then it's going to pump up, and it's going to drop down to 3, and it's going to pump up, and it's going to drop down to 3. Like, every time it pumps up, it's going to drop down to 3. And none of those times does it drop down to 3. So you better believe it that if they loaded up on puts, like, they're going to be feeling it just as much as you are who've been loading up on longs. There's always two sides to every coin in the market, you know? And I'll say this too, for those that are only AMC and you're not playing GME, if that's you and you're complaining about this, remember GME iterated really far down. Like, while AMC was chopping down in these massive drops, these big swings, ultimately it doesn't ever drop much below. It just doesn't. It just doesn't come very far below like 485, you know? Like, every time it's doing these drops, we pretty much had a wall here at 5 down to like 485 where you're just kind of recovering quickly. If you were share only here and you were buying in at 5, you basically have like no change. All right? Contrast that with what you see here on GME, the same dates. If you were buying in from July 2nd, you'd have to be buying this whole time in order to have like a cost basis that's still the same as July 2nd. Otherwise, you'd be red, and you would have been red ever since the 26th of July. You know, like, it did not stay above that level It did not hover. Is it come back there? Yeah. It looks like a nice little wraparound here. You know, it's come really close back to that same 2350 area, but like, I hear a lot of folks in AMC complaining every single day on the Discord, and it's mostly just a few people, but I'm like, I don't really get what you're complaining about. Bears are not raking in the dough here on your, you know what I mean? Like, off your back. Like, no one is getting money except for people selling calls or selling puts, for that matter. I bet you that people are making just as much money selling calls and puts here as they are, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. And then if you're looking at GME, it's like, oh, woe is me, AMC, it's been stuck at 5. Well, good Lord, GME got this massive burst of hope, and then it was just ripped from them for like a month to the downside. And it's the same thing. This is iterating down. Now this looks like it's going up, and AMC's not going anywhere. Well, guess what? That's because GME had to endure like a massive stroke of downside. Now it's reacting from an iteration standpoint like it should. I think the same thing is true here, and that's the weird thing is like I think this is iterating outward. The issue isn't that it's not doing that. The issue is this. These two iterations right here are on the same level. And if there's a third iteration, it's right there. If that's the last iteration, I think it probably is. They're all around the same level. So you have 3 iterations working themselves out around 5. That's not the case on GME. Like GME is iterating downward in these motions. It's not, none of them are at the same level. They're all on a slope. So as you're working out, you're working back up these levels. But that's not the case. AMC, these like last iterations start on August 5th. So from August 5th all the way up until about the 9th here, they're all around 5. So everything is going to work out as you work out 1, 2, 3, iterations around 5. They don't really change until you get to this one. This one sets up higher around 515, which is the support we need to break over, like the 520 area, 515 to 520. Coincidence? No, it's not. It's not a coincidence. If you're working out these iterations until you get to this kind of higher level, you're not leaving this area. I mean, that's kind of all there is to it. The reason why, again, people are kind of bemoaning it is because they want to see more movement. But look at August 5th on, GME. This is like super low. And you've been working your way up. And you're like, I don't get it. Why? Well, it's working its way back out. This has had ridiculous downside by comparison. So I find it to be a bit ironic, again, that a lot of folks are just kind of like really annoyed with it. I'm like, I get it. But at the same time, I don't get it because you're getting something that's better in a lot of ways than what was experienced on GME. And it makes sense because the last few iterations on this were chopping around 5. Like it was built into the design that this was going to be like holding this little area, I think from that point forward, we could, talk about it. But until you get to this kind of break mode above 515, 520, yeah, you're at the mercy of an operator. It sucks, I know. Woe is me, right? But I feel like there's two sides to every coin. And it's silly for me to forget about the other side of that coin right now. That there's a whole slew of people who are expecting it to go down, and it hasn't gone down. There's a lot of bears out there who think that it's going to go to 3, and it hasn't. And for them, I hate to say it, but this is in my opinion, it's an uphill argument. So it's a really tough one for a bear to argue. And aside from this one distributive action here, which was a very distributive action, obviously it drove us really, really low, finally broke that trend we were in here. But aside from that, there really hasn't been anything here that looks overtly bearish to me. And I've been pretty adamant about that. And I don't think you can even hope to advance unless you see some kind of massive upthrust here. So even in a bearish outlook, you would still expect it to have some kind of a massive upthrust. It looks like the opposite. I mean, I just showed you guys that EMA is like here. And I can't stress that enough. Like, it's the EMAs are here. It's completely the opposite of what we were experiencing last year, you know, going into August, where we were upthrusting and upthrusting and upthrusting and failing to advance. That's bearish. This is like completely the opposite. So I guess I'm really struggling to see where I don't know where the heck a bear could even make a case unless you see like a big upthrust and then a drop. So anyways, that's where I'm going to kind of hang my hat. It's not to make you like feel, my job isn't to like make you feel better, but even in the trepidation, even in like this sideways action, like you can choose to only look at the negative there, or you can choose to see it holistically and realize that it's not really negative, you know. If you think you're like struggling, you know, you got to think about the flip side of it. I'm not trying to say, oh, well, you could be GME. Sucks for them. No, I'm just saying, like, it could have set up a number of ways. This is the way that it's set up. It kind of demands in some ways that you stay in the same area for a little bit. And that's unfortunate, but no one's winning here except for the people selling puts and calls. And ultimately, like, once it makes a decision, then we can talk about, you know, strongly talk about direction. And until then, it's interpretation, and my interpretation is still bullish. So I'm not going back on that. I'm just saying, I find it to be just a little odd, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like, there's a lot of people who are just constantly, like, every day, like, upset. And I know some of you are listening right now, and you're in that boat, and I'm with you. Like, I get frustrated. The concept of the concept, it's not a concept, right? It's a reality. The reality of the frustration of these two tickers is very real. And I think that once you realize that's true, like, then you realize there could be a dialectic truth to like those things where there's two truths, right? They're both true. One is that this is frustrating, and the other is that there could be a big run up. I mean, like, they're both true. You don't have to pick one over the other. You don't have to say this is frustrating and pointless and turn into a nihilist. Wir nihilist. You know, nothing matters anymore, Booksy. Okay. I mean, you can do that, but that's only looking at one part of that. Or you can say, yeah, I'm frustrated when the price moves sideways for 3 or 4 weeks. I'm frustrated when that happens, and I'm also expecting a big move. Instead of, I'm frustrated when the price moves sideways, therefore I'm going to take it out on everybody I can and be upset all the time and be upset every single day. That doesn't make any sense. Hey, I've been there, man. I do it. I do it with other things in life. This is in part suffering. I mean, it is painful. Like, you're not suffering like somebody who doesn't have water necessarily, or food, or shelter, but it is a suffering, you know. And it's not meant to like downplay it, but it is a suffering. It's a kind of suffering. You're given an opportunity, and then you have to be patient and wait. And a lot of times, patience is one of the hardest things to suffer through. It's difficult. It's hard to wait for things in life. Probably because most people realize that life is short and you don't have all the time in the world. And so when things don't happen quickly, you feel like you're wasting time. Everything kind of boils down to like those fears, you know, of like, what am I doing? What if this is a big waste of time? You know, and you get angry, and I get it. We're all in the same boat, you know? But very little happens in life without some amount of suffering. Like very little good happens without some amount of suffering, somewhere. And especially good things that happen tend to take time. They just do. In some cases, years. Some of you may have noticed this. Now would be a good time to talk about it. Since we've got a little low in the price, we're not bearish here, okay? We're not particularly bullish just yet. We're more bullish than we are bearish because of those EMAs, because of that creek break. It's looking good. What we really want to see today is a close that's strong, and we want to see some kind of continuation going into tomorrow. If we don't see that, it's still not over. As long as the creek's holding and as long as that bottom holds, this could be a lower range pocket. And it's important to note that because it may feel like it's never going to end. It's going to do the same thing over and over and over again. That's not really true. It will end. And you're going to have to pay attention to it, or at least know where it's going to end. And I've given you guys kind of the bare bones, which is, in my opinion, if you just wanted to set an alert and walk away, probably 516 or something would be fairly good. I think that's fairly straightforward. If you're bullish and you just want to set an alert and walk away, that's probably what I would do, unless you're looking for a buy-in low. But now maybe a good time, since we have a little low in the price. It's coming into lunch hour. We're going to wait. We're going to have to kind of wait it out and see what happens. This is going to be a bit of a spread out day because I think we're going to want to see certain things happen, and I don't know exactly how long it's going to take. So it could be now, it could be tomorrow. That's a long, big window, right? Technically it could be Friday. I mean, just looking at the space that we have, we don't know. I know it's positive enough that it made me want to get on here and stream today. So that's why I'm here, to talk about stuff. And for those that missed me yesterday, I don't know if I apologize for that. I will say that I understand that I didn't post anything and it just kind of wasn't there, but no be there. But I also felt that there really wasn't much to talk about yesterday. Even though we went lower, it didn't seem worth going on to stream about because in my mind I was thinking like, well, I would like to catch the dips on stream. I do it most of the time. I prefer to kind of be on when those things are happening, but sometimes I just don't really care that much about it. Like, I have other things going on. I have my own life to live, right? That kind of stuff. But like, it's also like, well, unless it does something particularly bad, I don't really think it matters. And yesterday it really just kind of stayed in its downward channel and just tested lows, and that was sort of expected. So I felt like it didn't really warrant getting on the stream just to talk about, again, like a handful of pennies when people really just want to, I don't want to say only hear good news, but just when folks really want to know when things are moving forward. And I think things are moving forward now as opposed to yesterday. Not because we're green, but because of the particular price action that happened. But yeah, it would be a good time to mention that I did set up memberships. I know I had a long talk about that, and I told you guys that I was like hesitant to do that for a number of reasons. There's no obligation to be a member. There will be membership perks because there have to be membership perks. And those perks are pretty straightforward. I basically just did the cookie cutter stuff. If you're somebody that's like, dude, I'm not going to buy a membership ever, why are you even talking about this? Then that's cool. It's not for you. I talked about it with the group maybe a week ago. I said that I was hesitant to do it because I want that money to go towards a good cause. I want it to go towards sort of like a martial arts scholarship thing. So not just lining my pockets, but to do something good. Because my goal wasn't to make money off of you guys to survive, but was to make money off the market. And then if I were going to do that, I would have to have like a 501 set up for a nonprofit. And I talked to my significant other over the weekend, and I was thinking about how that didn't really it didn't occur to me that there really wouldn't be like a right time, because ultimately, like, it could take me a long time to get a non-for-profit started. And if it's something where I just feel like, hey, if it happens, cool. If it doesn't happen, whatever. There's no harm in trying. So one of the things I've been doing is making an effort to build up my portfolio for artwork to sell on Redbubble. So what I did yesterday, which is again for the same cause. So what I did yesterday was set up a Redbubble account for artwork sales. It takes a while to get approved for everything, but that's set up. And then I also set up the membership stuff, which again takes some time to get approved. Membership levels are pretty darn cheap. They're like $1 and like $3 or something a month. It's a way of supporting that's not like super chats, that's not, super like expensive or anything. Totally non-obligational, but I will say this, that I do fully intend to respect the perks of it. So if you're somebody that does sign up as a member, there's going to be members only streams. There's going to be members only posts. In fact, I'm probably only going to do posts for members. I know that sounds a little weird because you're like, well, Booksy, what if you only get like 2 members? Well, then I only get 2 members. Like, it's fine. I'm kind of at the point where I don't really like, I've never really liked YouTube comments anyways, but I just don't really like that kind of engagement. And I think that there's people that really want to hear the information and that I have a high amount of respect for, but if I'm going to do a membership program, it has to be taken seriously. So there's going to be membership perks and they're going to be taken seriously. And they're all outlined in like the membership stuff. Most of them are pretty cookie cutter. YouTube recommends, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. The only thing I don't have right now for members is probably like some of you guys are like, nope, that's it, man. You don't have that. It's like the emojis. I don't have custom emojis. You're like, what? No custom emojis? I ain't paying. That's fine. I'm going to make them, but I tried to yesterday, and when I started setting it up, and they don't require that you have them when you're setting it up, and I tried to do it, but I didn't really like the way they were coming out, so I want to make them good. So I'm going to work on those. Anyways, if you happen to sign up for membership, those proceeds are going to go to support young people that want to be in martial arts that need financial aid. And martial arts is a good way for young people to learn discipline, to get good adult presence in their life. Not me, because I'm not an instructor, but other people who are instructors who are really good at what they do, positive role models for them. I'm largely just going to be the financier for that, and that's it. So there's not going to be any kind of like parade for Booksy, if that's what you're wondering. That's not what it's about. It's very low key, and it's specifically to get people who want to do that. It's also good for people who are at risk, kids who, maybe in difficult situations, something consistent in their life that they can look forward to. Again, positive role models, goal setting, accomplishment. I know there's a million ways you can do it. This is the way I'm choosing to do it. So that's what the money is going to be for. So anyways, I'm pitching it. That's my pitch. I'm probably going to have to say it more than once. So please don't get annoyed if I say it more than once. It is what it is. Okay. I'm not going to apologize for it because I know what it's for. Now you guys know what it's for. I'm not going to, there's going to be people that come on and say, oh, you're just another dude trying to take money from people. No, it's totally up to you. The content here will always be here. So if you're somebody that just wants to come on and hang out and listen to me talk about charts, you're more than welcome to be here. No cost. But there will be incentive, I think, in the giving. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say about that. It's a good time to talk about it because there's a bit of a lull. I'm watching price movement as it goes, and I think that there's a challenge in today is going to be the necessity for retests, and that's where we're going to have to kind of, unfortunately, maybe we're going to hold our hold on to your butts. You know, like you're going to have moments. This came back down, which is good. It came pretty far, actually. It came back down to 22.30. But it is good. I said earlier I wanted it to come back down, and that's almost a necessity. And I think that the same goes for AMC. It really needs to come back and check those levels. I think we've checked 499. I don't know if it has to go to 498. That's kind of a that's kind of a question mark in my brain. So I'm not sure yet. But I think that it's possible. And frankly, I wouldn't even be really surprised if it came all the way back down to like 496, just because that's where we found support here. So a couple levels I'd watch for. I know those are beneath the EMAs. I get that. I'm not saying I want to go beneath them, but there's no harm in like chopping around them either. Like being comfortable going around them doesn't really mean much until you find that support. So at the end of the day, like we'll be looking at today, I mean, specifically, we'll be looking at that 200 SMA on the daily, and then we're going to be looking at that. And that one, again, we're kind of like more prone to be beneath it. So it wouldn't surprise me if we're not ready to go yet to just kind of close right beneath it. You can see that candle. Actually, it's pretty close to where I thought it was going to be up here. But did not go high, which is not kind of like a bummer. So it looks more like a hook right now. So it's definitely going to have to come back and find a support. Otherwise, it's likely going to be a challenge. But anyways, it wouldn't surprise me if we closed beneath again or right on it at like 5. So we'll see. It's going to be really, really tight. It could last for a couple days, but it's right there. It's right at 5. And then that 4-hour one, this one's a little tricky. And EMAs are not really, I think Dave mentioned it earlier, and I agree. They're not really leading indicators per se. Usually they go before, like the price moves before the cross happens, and then the cross is really like a, like for support of the move. And it's a difficult one. With how tight these are, I don't expect them to just, unless we get some massive push-up, I don't expect them to just flip overnight. And so until that happens, I would be like, hesitant. I kind of like this candle though. I know it sounds weird because it doesn't look very bullish at a glance. That big wick up with the compression back below looks kind of bearish, but it's about like where that compression is, and that compression is like right on top of this. So if we can hold that level, it's a big if, but if we can hold that level today, I think we've got a good cause to think that candle is actually pretty strong. This idea of like pushing out and then compressing back down and holding it is very significant, even though I don't really like that it wicked above the, I don't like that it wicked above the creek, the local creek, not the big one. Yeah. I can show you guys just so you see it. I don't want to be accused of like blowing smoke or something, but here I can show you the initial stuff I put on the. So Redbubble's kind of weird. I don't really like it for this idea, but it's probably the best thing I have to start with. I might change it later. I may not use Redbubble forever, but it's just easy. It's easy to set up. The problem is they have to like verify everything. So right now it's all set up, but they're not verifying me yet. And they said it could take like a couple days, it could take a month. And I'm like, well, that's pretty significantly different. That's a weird thing. Like their FAQ was like, it might take a few days or a month. And I'm like, what? A month? I hope it doesn't take a month. Well, I'm glad I started anyways. I'm glad I started sooner than later. But yeah, I can show you. So like I did a series of stuff for my Dojang, and that was to generate kind of for myself anyways. If I can get it to work. Oh, where did it go? Well, I was going to try to show you, but now it's acting weird. I guess I could show you the red bubble thing. Don't, like, people say stuff like that, and I appreciate it, Dave, but just don't, you realize that everybody's got, like, problems, and nobody's perfect, and, I'll tell you right now that I am as I am, like, I am as I am. Like, there's things that are there that I'm not happy about, and there's things that I would be willing to talk about, with friends or whatever, that difficulties for me. Like, I'm not a perfect person. There's struggles that I've had, mistakes I've made. But when I talk to you, like, I'm just talking to you. The mistakes I made is not who I am. Like, I am what I am. So, I think one person said being sincere or genuine, and that's something that's hard to do, and you have to be willing to be open about stuff and just be what it is. But like when I say that I care about this, like that's what I'm saying. That's all I like. It's in and of itself. That's the sincerity. Like I care about this cause. That's all there is to it. You know what I mean? There's nothing else to question there. But I don't like the idea of people like singing praises or something. Like I'm not God. I'm just a human being. And ultimately, like, if you knew me face to face, like I would let you down one day, like I'm just like anybody else. So yeah. So just don't put the faceless internet person on a pedestal, If you agree with what's going on and you feel that you do believe that I'm sincere about it, and I am, but I mean, I can't prove that to you, right, necessarily. It's hard to do that. Then that's where you should probably just be, with those things. Just be like, okay, well, I agree with this or I don't agree with this, and that's that. So this is the, I'll show you guys this. I think I can show you this. And then I'll probably leave it at that. This is not something you can find on here yet because it's not approved. It's not showing up on any kind of like shop or anything. Redbubble is one where you can buy and sell designs. It's a lot of like niche stuff. Like people make stuff that's not really, most of it's like pop culture. These are the artworks that I did for the Dojang. So these are ink and watercolor. Mostly watercolor. The ink is pretty light. I used like an India ink, but I didn't use a lot of it. And then I did watercolor washes. And then I composited those. So I did like hand-drawn illustrations, and then I did watercolor washes with some inking, and then I composited those on the computer because I wanted it to look a certain way. So these are some martial arts principles. These aren't things that, everybody's they're pretty universal, but like you may not have them as a mantra if you did martial arts. It could be different. But these are things that in Taekwondo, you look for. And each of these is a 8x8 inch, and that's about right. Like in terms of like the original sizing of the illustrations, some of them were a little bigger, some were a little smaller, but they are all printed. So I did a series of these, and then I printed them out for our dojang. And then I actually sold a copy of the prints, and that's the first money that I'll get to put towards this thing. So I sold a copy of the prints to someone else at another school because they want a copy of them. And then that's going to be the first contribution. So individually, like, I guess what I'm saying is each of these is like an 8x8. I don't know if you can see them very well. I might be able to like show you a slightly bigger. So nothing here is like particularly done. Like I had to make this stuff and then generate like interest and all that crap. But they check all your stuff. So these are the prints. So they look almost like I wish I could show you better, but it's kind of like the best I can do right now. Because I was checking on my computer, and like the way they are on my computer is not formatted very well. So this is probably the best way. So anyways, so you see like watercolor, and then I did the illustrations in pencil, inked over them, and then I did washes, and it almost looks like an airbrush, but it's not airbrushed. The outlines are hand done with the India ink, and then the brushing was done in like a digital format. That's the only thing that really done digitally. These paintings were paintings, so you can see that, hopefully, that they're actual real paintings. This is the kind of stuff that I like to do. I like to make stuff that looks beautiful and nice. And then the Korean is a rough translation of alertness or attentiveness, something like that. And then those are the ones that I'm selling. So there's like a handful of them. This is first series. There's going to be a lot more, but I don't have all the time in the world right now. So there'll be a lot. But this is like the shop, and it's just not, there's none, you wouldn't be able to find any of this stuff. But what's cool about Red, like right now, it's none of it's public. They're waiting for approval. But these are my original artworks. And yeah, if you were looking at these on the Redbubble site, you can buy them for like a number of things. So it would be like a coaster, or I mean, the coaster's kind of silly. I don't know why you'd want a coaster, but binders, whatever. They basically print your work on different things. So yeah, so this is the kind of style of artwork that I like best, and I don't know. I've always had like weird tastes in art, and sometimes people really like it, and sometimes people are like, man, why don't you just make it like more cool or something? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just the way I like it. So some people will describe my artwork as kind of feminine, I guess, in terms of like the way it looks. But I just think about things in terms of like my own aesthetic, what I like, what would I like to, and that's just, I'm not going to go out and like create a bunch of tattoos or something. So you get the idea. Anyways, so that's where I'm going with the Redbubble stuff. None of that's, I'm not selling you guys anything, by the way, if you're like looking at this like, oh, here we go. He's gone full businessman. Well, I am a business person. I mean, like I do my own like freelancing stuff. Like I'm pretty regularly like quoting people and talking about stuff. I don't typically do that here because it's not the way I look at this place. But if you're wondering like, well, where does this come from? Well, like this is just part of what I do. So it's not being really straightforward so you can see it. I actually really like this one. This one's really interesting. I wish I could show you guys a step-by-step for this. But it's like, this one might be one of my favorites for a couple reasons. But like I have, I'm not going to sit here and explain it. But anyways, so these are the ones that I'm selling right now. There's not really anything else to say about it. None of them are approved. You can't buy any of that stuff anyways, right this second. It'll probably be a while. I don't know. They say they email you. And then the membership thing on here will go towards the same cause. So that's all there is to it. And I will stop talking about that. We'll talk about stocks. And for those that were listening and you're like, I don't know what he's talking about. He's not talking about my stock market stuff. He's just trying to pitch me on something. I'm not trying to pitch anything. I was just showing some artwork and so you can see what I'm doing. And that way there's like, he says he's doing these things. Is he really doing these things? Yes, I really am. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. And I've got other stuff going on every day. But it's not always worth talking about. So, yeah, we're kind of pinned right now. So I think the volume is looking good today. In my opinion, it looks pretty nice. It's a little bit higher than the closing candle yesterday so far. I want more. I don't want it to be this low, but I think it's okay if we have a low volume break, as long as we hold above for AMC. I'm going to be pretty much a broken record on AMC until this move happens. So we're really looking at 498 to 5. For GME, I just really want to see it retest this area. It's kind of going back through it repeatedly. It does look a little bit like a distributive action because of how high that volume is on the top. So at this point, without being like too, I don't know, it just doesn't look like it made the move, does it? Like it kind of did and it kind of didn't. It came back to the horizontal level of support and it rejected. But in terms of the wave, it's kind of shallow, like it hasn't finished it. So I'm going to kind of read into this right now and say it may very well just be like a bearish flag. And we may need to see a deeper correction still. So if it holds 22.35 good on us, we can just assume that it's going to hopefully break back and come up pretty high. I think the target up here is $23, so it's pretty high. If it doesn't hold that, I hate to say this because it almost looks like a complete reversal. Like you're just saying, oh, it can go really high or really low, but it is what it is because it's got the potential to come all the way back down to the bottom of this flag at 21.98, which is fine. It wouldn't kill it. And again, in some ways, I kind of like that better because this might present itself more like an upthrust. This kind of present itself more like a bottom to me, which I like better. So I almost like the idea of coming down more. But either way, no matter what happens, once GME finds its bottom and finds its support above 23.35, I'm still going to be pretty bullish. So whether that happens now on the current bottom or that happens later, I think it's just about the timing of the end result here, the end game. And then I said already on IWM, I kind of expect this to sort of chop high. If it does come back down, it may come as low as like 211.50s. My expectation is, though, that this is probably going to be sort of like what we had on the bottom. You might have a bit of a wind up here going into Friday. So I wouldn't expect a whole lot of change unless you see above 215 or below. I'm going to actually change this to 211.50 now. Those are the two markers. If you were going to just put price alerts, walk away, those are the two I'd probably use, because I think between now and then, going into like the Friday talk for Powell, I think you're going to be stuck between the two. Haven't talked about MPW much at all. There's not really much to say. We kind of did like a 50-50 swing, and it didn't quite come as low as it could have. I thought it would come all the way back down to 550. Much like the others, it's kind of generating time. So every time we have these pumps and drops, we're kind of pushing up, making new creeks. And this one's no exception. There's just a lot of space. So very easy to see how you could chop pretty much in this little range right around this entry support. Much like GME, it needs to find that support before anything else goes forward. So this chopping through it isn't really a bad thing, but for all we know, this could be like, again, a Thursday into Friday kind of deal, and you really don't know until it makes that advancement. So right now, if it jumps back above 481, if I were going to bracket this off, I'd say 481 is a good one to mark off as a potential, just to highlight, like, hey, what's going on? 481 is a strong number. And then below, I would say below that bottom at 450. And I probably wouldn't worry if it drops because there's a support at 450. So I wouldn't worry if it dropped beneath the previous low here at 457 to try to hit that 450 here. As you can see it, you definitely could see that second drop, and it could go as low as 450. I think that's likely. So this is maybe what I would expect. Yeah, it's sort of an ABC correction. 1, 2, 3, and then maybe we turn. And again, probably just dependent on Friday. If you were going to do a fifth wave here, I could see it as well into Friday. You can tell, that's a possibility. So there's a lot of space. This is going to be I'll be frank with you. I think this is going to be like the last. I'm hesitant to always say stuff like this because I know that this comes back to bite you, but I really do feel this week is the last week that we're not going to have volatility. There's a couple reasons for that, and it started with AMC, but it goes through all these others as well. I think you're just kind of running into a corner with most of the stocks again, sort of like what we were doing here on the 14th. We're doing it again right now, but in this case, I genuinely feel that AMC specifically and GME, but AMC definitely, it's at this point where you can't wedge forever. You can't do this or that forever. There are ways of delaying it for another few days. But after that point in time, it doesn't really make sense. So I was arguing earlier with myself about how, well, if I keep setting up new highs, I can keep generating creeks that are higher and then just chop along until I break out. Yeah. But again, it's like, let's say, for example, you didn't want to break above this 515 marker, right? Like you've already generated what looks like an ascending triangle here. Most of the time, you're not going to go beyond like 60% of that triangle. You might go pretty far. But even if you push it out like a whole nother week, that's August 30th, which is kind of far, right? Even if you did that, that's like the end of the triangle. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense if you're going to revisit the top again to have no volatility. So like this is the first move I think that's starting to move the volume needle. And then this one's a big deal because you come back up again, you could come down, sure, but you're now on top of that EMA, so there's significant change here as opposed to, this move, which was significant, even if people don't want to think it was. So like every single time we're going back up, it's more and more and more significant. And this one would probably be even more so than the last, it's like a creek out of the creek kind of deal. And that's a big deal when you're jumping like multiple EMAs. So I'm going to maintain that we're going to see some volatility starting this week. And I'm pretty sure most of y'all are aware the Jackson Hole thing. It's a possibility that there's some big news there. It's probably going to be mostly what it usually is, which is, again, a dovish Powell who's not giving away a whole lot. But either way, like it's going to cause a stir. So I think this will be the last week that we have kind of mild weather. And then I genuinely think we're going to start seeing a pretty convincing uptick in volatility, probably both directions to some degree. So NFTs are whatever. I mean, it's kind of the idea of like a limited edition print where you have a print would be something where you like print out 100 and there's only ever going to be 100. That's the idea of NFTs. So Paris Gorman says the 2-month chart on AMC and look at the stochastic. I think you mean stochastic, not scholastic. Scholastic is like scholarly. Stochastic RSI, and look at the past 3 years. It's all lining up to another January squeeze. Yeah, I believe it. If you're back on later, remind me and I'll do it. I'm about to take a lunch break. I think you commented earlier and I missed it. So Shaw said, Booksy, I was up 50,000, now back to almost break even. Can you make me feel better? I have a primary home and rental property. Is that enough to be happy at 27? I don't know if I don't think you're being sarcastic. At 27 years old, you're doing just fine. I'll say this much. Most people in their 20s nowadays aren't thinking about the future very much. They're still trying to figure out what they want to do. And I was probably the same way. And I wish I had thought more about the future back in my 20s, but there's no going back in time, right? You have to just take what you can when you can. So if you have the mindset, meaning like if you have the initiative now, just go ahead and take the initiative, you know? So if you have the mindset that you're working towards the future, that's a good thing to have. There's a lot of people that will say like, don't squander your youth, like take advantage and just go crazy and do dumb stuff while you're young. I think there's a measure of that, but like once you leave childhood, like it's very unwise to kind of go backwards. So don't beat yourself up for losing, this or that. You gotta just keep moving forward. Winners are not people who never lose. That's not true. We're not Talladega Nights here. You ain't first, you're last. No, I mean, like, winners are people who just don't quit. You're gonna make mistakes and lose stuff. The only way that becomes a loss is if you make it a loss. If you just don't do anything with it and you squander the lessons learned, then you're acting like a loser, Because everybody that's made it big doing anything has had setbacks, big setbacks. And it's not even really about making it big. Like some people are all about that. They just want to like get Lamborghinis and be rich or something because they want comfort. It's really not really about that. It's about like where you place your security in life. And for a lot of folks, their security is not really in their pocketbook. It's really in like their family and like the impact that they leave on the world good or bad, is more of their concern. And so money is just a tool. So it's also like, where is your priority? If your priority is, I need to make a bunch of money in order to get XYZ, I probably couldn't help you with that, you know? If your priority is, I just want to make money because, I want a better future for people around me, and I could maybe help with that. I've met a lot of people who are just blatantly materialistic. I remember a guy I met on the when I worked on a boat like a long time ago. Now I was really young, and he, he was unapologetically materialistic. He looked me in the eyes. He basically was like a nihilist. He just didn't believe in anything, and figured that the world was all gonna turn to dust one day. So he better just get what's his. And we had a lot of really good conversations, me and him, because I don't agree with him about that, but he would he was just so comfortable, like, in just saying, like, yeah, I just think the point right now, my point in living is just to get a bunch of money and be more comfortable and make this life the best I possibly can, and until I kick the bucket one day. Just zero care for his own. I mean, in some ways, maybe there's an admirable quality to that, because at least he's like not on the fence pretending like he's, you know what I mean? There's a lot of people who like pretend like there's some great meaning, and then they really don't act that way. And at least for him, it was like he just wore it on his sleeve. And so he just unapologetically materialistic. So he felt like the only goal in his life was to gain comfort between now and his deathbed. And I'm like, well, I think it's a very human response to the struggles of life, that we want to just be more comfortable. I don't think anyone wants to be in an uncomfortable life. But reality is that in some ways, and it's not meant to be like fatalistic either, but in some ways most of what you're doing in life is going to be struggle. So like, and even if you're just like a naturalist or a nihilist or something, like, you're probably going to say that it's all about just kind of getting what's yours or whatever. It's nature or something. Darwinism. I don't know. But your priorities in life are really what going to determine whether that 50K loss is going to be just to kind of get back to the point, really going to be something that matters in the end. The way I see it, money is like a tool. It's not evil, it's not good. It just kind of is. And you can use it for good, you can use it for bad, or you can use it for nothing. There's people who just sit on it their whole life, and don't do anything with it, because they think it's like their rock and their security, And then they die, and then it goes, you know what I mean? Then it really does mean nothing. It's like, unless they maybe pass it on to somebody else. I just look at it as like, if my family's eating and I've got shelter and I've got food, I'm doing better than like 99% of the world that came before me. And that really should be enough to be grateful and to not crave more. But we do live in a materialistic world, and so you're taught that if you're not making 6 figures a year, you're a loser, and it's like, that's dumb, That's like a really American, modern, ethnocentric almost mindset. Like, billions of people have lived before you without basic food and shelter requirements, and like in America, most people, even the homeless people, I know it sounds really weird to say that, but it's true to some degree. Even like the homeless people have more opportunity than somebody that lived in, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. I mean, it's crazy um, to think that, but it's true. So it's like this idea that like, oh, it's just natural to crave more. I don't know, man. It's kind of like I think our priorities are screwed up. So if your priorities are straight, I don't think that $50,000 is going to mean a whole lot aside from the lessons you learned. I think you'll look back and say, yeah, I learned some lessons, but I'm still alive. I lost close to, first time I traded, I did really well for a couple years, and then I lost close to $20,000. And at that time, that was kind of everything. I mean, my account, I wouldn't say it wiped out, but it was basically like everything I had gained, and it was just gone in like an instant. And I quit trading like shortly after that, and I became kind of depressed about it. And I was like, man, how do you recover from something like that? You can't recover. And then a decade later, I'm looking back like, yeah, I recovered. It wasn't the end of the world. And ultimately, like, was that money that I could have used for good? Yeah, it was. And that's so you too. You try to take a lesson of like, well, what did I do to lose it? Like, why did I risk losing that money to begin with? What did I think that I could gain by holding on more for more? And then I did the same thing during this squeeze twice, 3 times. The crow cried, and I 3 times I let it go. And it's like, when are you gonna learn? When are you gonna learn that more is not necessarily what you need? What you need is to do good with what you have. And if you don't learn how to do good with what you have, you're not going to do better with more. That's why people who get rich quick, a lot of people who get rich quick, not everybody, but a lot of people who get rich quick, it's gone. You hear about these NFL players who just lose all their money. Why? Because they grew up, without money. And it's a status symbol. And then when they get money, they don't know how to manage money. It's hard. A lot of these folks grow up and they don't know how, and I'm like not any that different. I mean, it's like my parents taught me some degree managing money, and I really appreciate them for that. But it's like you get a lot more and then it just goes away just really fast. Well, it's because you didn't learn how to manage what you had when you had a little bit, And I've said it before. I don't like saying it, but there are, because it sounds mean or something, but it's not mean. I don't mean it to be mean. There are like really frugal, like generous, wealthy people who do really well with their money and they manage it really well and they give a lot. And there are some really greedy, wealthy people who don't manage their money well, who keep a lot for themselves, and a lot of them end up squandering a lot of it down the road. And the exact same thing is true for poor people. There are some really generous poor people who manage their money and they give a lot based on what they have, and they're fine. They're happy. They're not necessarily as comfortable as they would like to be. That's true. And then there are people who are poor that are kind of greedy. Like they squander the money that they get. The money comes in and it goes really fast. And it's not because they're paying rent. It's because they're just buying stuff they don't need to buy. And then they just want more, more, more. And those are the folks that usually covet what other people have. Like they want what other people have. It's never enough. The grass is always greener kind of type. And it's born out of a sense that, again, like that greed is born out of a sense of insecurity, that money is going to give them what they think they want. And so it just depends on your priorities, man. I can't tell you what they should or shouldn't be. Like I have my own priorities in life based on things that I believe, and I've not always held those priorities to be true. Like I'll say that they're priorities, and then you say one thing, you do another. You're a hypocrite. That's part of who I am. Like, and it's going to be part of a lot of people's story because you want to do something, and then something else happens and you make a dumb decision and whatever. So that might be you with money. I wouldn't beat yourself up over it. If you had good priorities and you screwed the pooch and you lost some money, it's not because your priorities were out of whack. It's because you probably didn't have the right barriers and, fortifications to make sure you don't. I mean, it's really just about setting barriers and boundaries and just making sure that you're careful so that you protect those priorities you have. That's kind of the biggest lesson I learned just from this little TED talk here, if you guys wanted me to finish it. Biggest lesson I've learned in the past few years is just I'm not always the best at setting those boundaries. I got to make sure that I have things in place that prevent me from being stupid, like basically. And I have priorities, but if I don't set up reinforcements for those priorities, sometimes my human nature, sometimes my inability to have self-control, or sometimes impulsivity, those things can take over. And your boundaries are not there. You're going to just run over yourself and shoot yourself in the foot. It has nothing to do with what you believe is right or wrong. It has to do with the fact that you didn't reinforce it. Frankly, like, I lost money on that August move because I was arrogant. Like, there's a pride element there. I didn't think I needed to reinforce it with a stop loss or with this or that I was going to make, it was going to be fine. And that because I believed it was the right thing, it was going to happen. The market doesn't care. The market's without feeling, it's not there to help you or hurt you really. You could argue that the institutions behind it are there to hurt you. I could hear that argument. But as an entity itself, it's just there, So you only have to ride the train as long as you want, and then you can get out. And that's kind of what I learned the last couple of years was I just didn't, it had nothing to do with my intent. It had nothing to do with my intent. It was just a lack of concern for my own safety. Like I did not build the necessary walls to protect my investments. Therefore, all that earnest, I want to do this for the right reason, all that stuff was there. It wasn't, again, it's that word dialectic. It's like, that was a truth. It was really what I wanted. But at the same time, there was another truth, which is I didn't protect it. So both of those are true, It wasn't like you squander something on purpose. So just check yourself, think about what it is that you lost. Think about whether or not you actually were doing it for the right reasons. If those reasons, I don't know what they are for you, but if you were doing it for the right reasons and you still lost money, then it's not because you lack conviction or because you really don't believe that. That's dumb. You probably really did believe it, but you probably need to see how you could set up boundaries to protect those convictions, protect those priorities, and not be arrogant and think that you don't need boundaries. Not think so highly of yourself that you think that you'll figure it out or whatever. Life will go on. You will be fine. If you're doing stuff at the age of the 20s and you're already thinking about financial security and stuff, you're probably on the right path. Probably. If your goal was to get a bunch of Lamborghinis and stuff, I probably can't help you, like I said, because I don't agree with that. That's not my belief. But if you're doing it for the right reasons and you screwed up, it's okay, man. You're going to be fine. Just learn how to set priorities and boundaries for yourself, and just assume that you're going to make a mistake and you'll have those boundaries there to protect you. And then you'll be happy that you had those boundaries there to protect you. Oh, I made a mistake. Well, good thing I had boundaries there. You know what I mean? Good thing I just did something as simple as setting a stop loss. Whatever. Most of the time when people ask me those questions, they don't want some weird guru, mystical health response or something. I know that's what it sounds like, but I'm not trying to give you self-help. I'm just telling you that's my experience. Take it or leave it. You decide what you want to decide from that. But most of the time what people are asking is like, I made a crappy investment. Do I think it's going to be okay? And what you really are asking for is reassurance. And all I can tell you is, yeah, like I think it's going to go up and it's going to go up far, but that's not really what you need. Like at the end of the day, I can't give you necessarily what you need. Um, so I'm just saying, if you're somebody that's like always like worried and looking for like reassurance from people on YouTube, take it or leave it, man. But I don't think that you're going to get it on YouTube, what you really need. Um, I just don't think it's going to happen. And it's definitely not going to be, um, you know, there's just sort of another group of people like that do trade stocks. And it's not, I don't think this is the people that typically watch my channel anyways or listen to me. Those are the folks that are like, they idolize like the Wolf of Wall Street kind of lifestyle. Like, and I just don't think that there's like really nothing good I can say about that. So I'm not going to ever be able to, I'm never going to be able to help people like that who just really want that big paycheck. I'm like, well, I mean, at the end of the day, like you're just trying to catch the wind in the right direction for your sails, but a sailor knows how to sail against the wind, you know? Sailor's not bound by just the direction of the wind. They're not. They know how to use a crosswind to, accomplish what they need to accomplish. So I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing about this stuff from me. This is way too personal, Booksy. Not really. I think it's just human. That's what I mean, It's like the idea of sincerity is a really difficult thing for us as a culture it's really weird. I grew up in a time when, like you would, I don't know, man. It's just different. Everything is very like tongue in cheek, and I'm a big fan of that kind. I love like the self-referential stuff. I'm a huge fan of like The Office and like that kind of fourth wall breaking stuff for the most part. But eventually it becomes like this insincere, like nothing can be taken seriously, And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like if there's no punchline, people don't want to hear it. And I'm like, huh. Like, when did that happen? It's like there can't be any serious moments. People get uncomfortable. Where's the punchline, Booksy? I don't know. There isn't one. He's asking me about losing a lot of money. He was being very vulnerable, talking about that as a young person. That's a big deal. There's no punchline. Yeah, Shaw, I'm kind of just catching up. I know I was like monologuing a bit. As long as you're willing to do the work, you're going to be just fine. So kids are really resilient. They just are. I'm not saying it's great for kids to be malnourished or be in bad situations. That's obviously not what I'm saying. I don't like that for anybody. That's not pleasant. I think we can do a lot for people like that, and we should do a lot for people like that. That's my opinion. But at the same time, like for you and yours, I mean, it happens. You're not always going to be in like the best state of mind. Like, you're not going to be a perfect dad all the time. You're not going to be a perfect husband all the time. Like, you're going to make mistakes. So don't put yourself on a pedestal and think that you're never going to have to say sorry to somebody, you know. But the people in your life, if they love you, even when you make those mistakes, they're going to stay with you, and you're going to have chances to do it again, you know. And I can't tell you how long or whatever. Nobody knows how long people have to live or whatever. That kind of stuff's pretty deep. But like, I'm just saying, like, in general, kids need, you know, food, shelter, clothes, and beyond that, they just need love. Like, provision is something that I think, again, is like, it's a time-based thing. It just takes time. I have goals for my son that I really don't know what he's going to do with them. You know, like, the idea of helping him with a higher education is a tricky one in our country. It's really expensive. And I could sit here and like reason out that he may not just go to do a higher education, or he may go to trade school, or he may decide to, you know, join the circus. Like, I don't know. Like, so why would I spend effort? He should have to work for himself, blah, 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 blah. I mean, but that's not really what I want to give him. I just want to give him love. And part of that is me working towards financially helping him. And some people may not agree with that, but I don't care. Like, that's my decision. So like, the goals that I have for him, I don't even know what he's going to do, but I know that one of the goals I have is to give him something. So if I can do it in a way and protect that something and keep that from going away, if possible, then he'll have something, even if he decides to not go to college. I don't have to pay his way. You know what I mean? Like, he'll be okay. He will make it through. But it's a way for me to love him in a way that, frankly, he doesn't even know yet. Like, he has no idea. And it may not ever occur to him until he's older. Like, oh yeah, my parents put aside money for me. And then he realizes that that's not a luxury that everybody has. And hopefully he'll be like, oh, okay, so they made a decision. You know, so on and so forth. That's how I felt about my parents. Like, they didn't pay my way through school, but they did pay parts of it. They paid down my interest on my loans and other stuff. And I look back at it now and I'm like, they saved me a huge amount of money. They didn't pay for everything. They couldn't pay for everything. But they did save me a huge amount of money. And that, to them, was a sacrifice. Like, they could have done anything they wanted with that money. And they chose to help me. So, you know, I wasn't handed a college education. Like, I'm still paying for my college education. Still paying for it. Like a lot of my generation. But it was something that, like, it could have been way worse, you know. And then the rest of it's up to me, you know. It's not their responsibility. That's kind of the way I feel towards my son. I'm like, he'll be okay if he's willing to work. So your kids, they don't really need, like, they're not going to know and understand what you're doing, you know. They just won't. I mean, did you really understand what your parents were doing when you were young? No. You were probably, like, playing with, like, Pokemon cards or something, you know. Like, you're not, the only time you cared about money when you were a kid is when your parents said no. Most people, it's like when they said no, or if there was, like, no food on the table, if it was something more serious like that. You know, there's people who have different experiences, but for a lot of kids in America, if you're an American, it's like, you probably didn't even think about money until your parents said, no, we can't afford that. And then you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean you can't afford it? Then you thought about money, you know. What do you mean we're only going to eat beans and rice for a week? Why? Well, because money. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about it, you know. My son is weird, dude. He's like a little hippie. He thinks that he's going to live off the land or something. And I'm like, you don't even know how to like tie your shoes, kid. Like, you don't want to sit there and learn how to tie your shoes, even though I've tried to show you like 5 times, and you want to live off the land? I mean, granted, he's like really little, but I'm like, you're not going to make it. You got to be willing to learn stuff. If you're going to live off the land, you got to like really be willing to learn stuff. He's like, I don't want any money. I just want to be off the grid and live in the woods and hang out with animals. And I'm like, yeah, you can do that, but you have to have a lot of skills to do that. And tying your shoes is not high on that list. And you're not willing to do that. So like, but he says that because he's like, I don't want to deal with money. And I'm like, okay. Anyways, point is, you're young. If you don't have kids yet, or if you're about to have kids and you're starting a family, I can tell you that they don't care about money. They don't know what money is. The first few years of their life, it's not even going to occur to them that all the stuff that they get or don't get may or may not depend on your money. You know what I mean? Like, it's all, they don't understand any of that. So as long as you're willing to work and you love your kids, you're going to be just fine. And you have, you know, however many years, if you want to help them out with their car or college or whatever, you got 20 years, so you got time. Just make sure that you learn from your mistakes when you're younger. You don't repeat those mistakes over and over again. Yeah, I looked at Clove a couple days ago. I think we've looked at it a few times in the last couple weeks. I feel like it was Monday, but it may have been something else. Maybe the other one. Yeah. So there was a chance here. Yeah. We looked at this like a couple days ago. I already kind of gave my TA on it, but I'll give it again. It's like historically, it's like super overbought. Like on the weekly, it's like super overbought. I think that the natural price target was this little yellow pocket, and I said that if you were in it from the bottom, I personally would not be trading beyond this little yellow pocket. I think that would be pretty silly. Unless it has some kind of crazy squeezing thing happening, I don't think it's going to go beyond 4. So that's where I'm going to sort of leave it. There's really nothing else to say about it right now. Like, it's going to have big swings while it's having big swings, but it's going to have big sell-offs when it has big sell-offs. That's the nature of these kind of moves. So you have to just keep that in mind. Like right now, it may be very well that it's going to run again, or it could be this is a distributive top. It's going to hit a new high here and then dump, off the face of the earth. And you decide what you want to do with your money, but the targets were pretty clear anyways that there really doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence you'd come back above 4 without making some kind of retracement. That's the only thing I can give you from a technical standpoint. And I talked about it again a couple days ago. I didn't really feel like there was anything else to say about it. So, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me to not ride it as high as you can. I think you should try to maximize your profits, but I mean, to me, it's like, it's a no-brainer. If you're up like 1,000% from this like penny's bottom, why would you just, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Barriers, you know, boundaries, like protect your investment. Think about it logically as best you can. If it's on the weekly and it is historically overbought and it's extremely historically overbought, then there's only one of two things that's happening, right? You're either in a squeeze that's going to just continue forever or whatever, or you're about to have a ridiculous rug pull. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be pleasant. So I don't know what else to say except just be careful, you know? It makes sense to me. This is like a 50% retracement. It makes sense to me. There's a, you know, weekly EMA right up here. There's a lot of stuff that makes sense going up to about 4. Beyond that, it just looks like a risk on proposition. You do whatever you want to do. You want to hold it and it goes beyond, you can say, haha, I held it, it went way fast. Okay, cool. Like, I'm happy for you. You know what I mean? Like, but at the end of the day, like, this is a 50-50 swing around this range. It's a 473% move. It's historically oversold or overbought on the weekly. What else am I supposed to tell you as a technical chartist? There's nothing else I can tell you right now. Like, I cannot tell you this is going to continue. I just can't. There's nothing I can do. Like, I cannot possibly make a case right now that this continues to go. The only case would be like hopium. That's it. Or like a whip around and it's going to go way up to all-time high. You know what I mean? Like, okay. Do you see the dilemma? Like, it just, there's nothing here for me to say it's going to continue. Like, I just have nothing. Except for maybe the notion that this is some kind of like humongous short squeeze or something. That's it. That's all I could tell you. And I can't predict that kind of stuff. Like, I could not tell you how far it's going to go. I think this was a spring bottom. I think this was an auto reaction, phase B top, spring bottom, broke out. You're heading back up to the support or the supply. It's historically on the weekly, overbought. Indicators blown out. Just looks like it's about to stop, but I guess if it went beyond, it goes beyond. You guys got to do what you got to do. Somebody said something about B. Riley. I don't know what that is. Is that a bank or something? This is a weird chart. It's kind of like the other one, but in reverse. So I would probably say, I don't know. I don't know what this is. So I don't know if I should use that or not. It's at a 382 retracement, regardless on that. The 0.5 is at 264. I don't know, was there news or something about it? It looks like a widening that broke down, which is kind of strange. But it looks like a widening spread here that kind of broke to the downside. So I would suggest that if it came back above this marker here, around 986, that it could have a pretty strong continuation back up to 1794. Based on where it is now, I think that should be like a good enough kind of trade. That's an 80% trade. So I would not necessarily trade it here because, yeah, I know it could be like tomorrow when it jumps, but the issue is I don't really know where it's trying to go. This is the only floor I can see liquid-wise. I think it already hit it. It looks like a major retest on that floor. But guys, it's like anything in life. It's like I couldn't really say until maybe it's like a spring. That's kind of what it looks like on the that's kind of what it looks like here. Like auto reaction, phase B, bottom, spring. It does not look like that on the price action. So that daily is super. There must have been something that happened. Yeah. Nah, I'd probably just wait till it gets above 986. So it's just like an auto reaction right now. You're asking, is it just a reaction to a bounce or is it squeezing? It's kind of both. I mean, an auto reaction goes back up to somewhere around supply, which in theory could be quite high here. But you can see like there was an intention to dump it beneath this trend line. So I'm thinking that trend is going to act as a supply for now. It seems a little evident that that's happened already. So again, it's like, I don't know if I would even touch it personally, unless you're just kind of really risk on. You like to trade the auto reaction, maybe that's a possibility. So auto reaction usually comes back to a preliminary support. This just has like a massive gap. So I'm going to look at extended trading hours. Yeah, it's like right here. It's at 843. So maybe like that price level could indicate that it's going to go. So maybe just using 9 is fine. The problem with an auto reaction is that it could just be just that. So it's like, could be like auto reaction breakout, or it could be all big auto reaction and you're still going to get a bottom. So if I were looking at this as if it was Wyckoff, I probably think this is the auto reaction because it came back to this level. This is a phase B bottom, and then this is some kind of a top. So what I would look for is whether or not it's going to provide a support or if it's going to drop again. And this is where things get kind of dicey, because if it drops again, it could be a very long-winded diagram here. I don't like comparing everything to like the 2020 bottom on AMC, but it's just a classic example of like possibility. I don't think it's a squeeze. I think it's probably going to come back. I mean, if it didn't and it jumped right over, then you have your answer. So I guess if it comes back above and finds support above 980s, you already have that answer. Okay, it's going to keep going. Then you just trade it back up to the gap level, maybe. But I think that the general precedence here would be to see if it's going to retain that trend low or go for a creek dump, which would be like a spring. So this would be an LPS, and then potentially like there could be one very similar where it's like a hard bounce and then it goes into a spring mode and then it jumps across, and this all could happen pretty fast. But who knows, you know? You're like, that's not helpful. No, it's not. And then the other thing that I look at is like a diamond. So it's like a falling diamond, which is kind of like that shallow S curve we talk about. And a lot of times what I'll do for that is I'll use the initial drop-in value. And this is another reason why I might hesitate, is I think you could end up with a pretty significant time, you know, wasted. And there's so many things that could happen here. Anyways, point is, I'd look at that drop-in value, and then I'd say, you know, maybe longer term, that's what you might expect. And this makes sense because you can see like that build out could go all the way back to like 13, which is the bottom of that trend. So it's more of like a parallel, and it doesn't really give you necessarily like the right answer. I do think longer term, it likely does go back to 14. That's what it looks like to me. But you have to then take into consideration that that could be very delayed if it backs up. So timing is tricky. Like that's the ultimate, that's the breakout target, but it doesn't mean you're going to get there instantly. Sometimes that does happen because of trajectory in, trajectory out kind of stuff. But it really just depends on when it leaves. So I don't know. This is a tough one. Big move. Hard to read because there could be a lot of time left in this accumulative action down bottom, assuming it's accumulative. It's just a setup that could go much longer. People don't like to hear that, but that's just the nature of ranges. Like, it just is, you know? And yeah. So I think what we're seeing is this is like a 50-50 around the breakout. So I think it's moved like a 50% up. So it's retraced back to, it's kind of similar to what we looked at AMC, right? It's kind of like it retraced back to the top, which is really similar to what AMC did. This is a very micro example of the same thing. It's got big moves on it, which is cool. It's a big swinger, but ultimately it just popped through its bottom, went to the top. And at this point, it would be reasonable to maybe expect it to retrace and sell back down to some retracement level. Maybe around 614, maybe around 566. Like either one of those would be totally normal. And then make a decision. So I don't know what's going on with B. Riley, so I can't really comment. But like anything like this is just speculative play-wise if something bad happened. And I think, yeah, I agree with Dave that this could easily end up being like a distributive action pretty quickly. It could be that this is a secondary upthrust to sell off. You would know if it came back below here. If it doesn't hold the creek and it drops below prematurely, kind of like this drop through here, then it's probably not good. I don't dislike clove. I think that um, I think that the challenging thing about clove is that you have, like I said, there's just no technical basis for me to see it move on. I don't know what else to say. Like, I understand it moving 10% or more. It's in a very highly volatile area. But just because it swings up 10 or 15 or 20% one day does not mean it's going to continue the next. You just have to take it in stride and look at where it's at. It's at a highly probable sell-off zone. That's all I'm going to say. I just don't have any other information to give you. If somebody shows me a pile of oranges, I'm just going to say it's a pile of oranges. Like, I can't call it something that it's not, you know. And I just don't know if something different happens, like it would be beyond the scope of my ability to interpret that. So, there's really not much to say right now on AMC and GME. GME is doing its thing right here. We talked about it potentially coming back and finding support at 22.33. So that first thing this morning, I probably would prefer that. Happy it did it. It's kind of making lower lows as it pushes, so I'm not positive it's going to continue, but because of that, it makes me a little nervous that there might be a sell through at some point. So I'm just going to be patient. It would not surprise me to see this kind of stop here and do a little head and shoulder jig and then dump. And that's what I was worried about earlier, was like maybe a little too early to say it's safe. Because I could see it distributing right here and then dropping through. You can see these lower lows consecutively. That's a difficult one to read. This is kind of pushing down, trying to advance lower. So I think a big part of the reason they brought it up here is because they were looking for sellers. Because it just hasn't really had a lot of sellers on the way up. Not enough. And this is the critical level to kind of whip around, so that they're using that to their advantage. Operators, I mean, to create and generate sell-offs. The rest of this is just me kind of staring at the chart, thinking about, all right, where does it go if it comes low? Where does it go if it goes high? And it's sitting right now on that support, so it's a stone's throw away from a breakdown. Likewise, if it holds support, it's kind of just chilling out. Could just push right up. It's really tough. And both of them are in the same spot, and that's okay. AMC looks fine. I don't think it looks bad. To me, it's as expected, you know, today. I would not have expected it to necessarily just break out and go. It looks like an iterative move again. I know you guys hate that word, but what I mean is that they keep taking the same thing, and if it works and they achieve what they want to achieve, they just do it again. So right now, that's what this looks like to me. You see this walk down right here? There's like 1, 2, 3. So it worked the first 2 times, doesn't work the last time. Then they take it up. And look at them doing it again. Like 1, 2, 3. You know, it's like they lopped over this creek and then they jumped over the next one. And it's like the same general thing here. So it's just a way of delaying time-wise. I mean, it looks identical to that first layup here. So I speculated that they might be trying to target, you know, like the 490 area instead of where they stopped first. So this could be like a thought of as like an auto react, phase B top, and then the support, and then there could be a spring before you jump. It's one way to look at this. I think it's a weird way, but it could be that's the case. And I would say that because this is where it broke that trend, remember? So it kind of like resets here. And from the rest of it, you would derive this as like a possible spring move to get below this bottom right here at 496. And I think it's done a pretty good job of establishing that as a support. So I don't have a lot of questions there. It's more just about, I don't know if it's going to be enough or we're going to dig a little bit more of a nosedive. And RSI on the 6 minute, it's definitely got room for it. It does look like it's ascending through this kind of downward motion. It's kind of been driving up. Price has been driving down. But it's a short time frame. So if they continue to do the same thing, my expectation might be that, and it kind of looks like it there, you would see this volume shrink to like nothing, and then you'd make a sudden move. And again, like, it would not surprise me if that move was actually downward to start. It's sort of like a rapid fire, like boom, boom kind of thing. Where would it go? That's the first jump. The second jump is, I don't even know. I guess it's this one. Yeah. So if it slides down, it probably looks like this. Probably looks like a sell through and gets really violent. Maybe they are trying to get to that 480 something mark. But it looks more like 490, 491. That would be the potential for like a sort of a spring-like action. And then we'd have to see. We'd have to see what happens here. But I imagine, because of the way this is set up, hooked in the middle, there, across the middle. I think it would have to go up a little bit first. You'd see like another one. Push up to like 501. That could be where it changes. If it's going to go up, probably right there or shortly after, because that would be a reset of the iteration. It's really tiny. But I suppose if it didn't make another low, you know, you could see it drive back the other way and start out. And then otherwise, I would just look for the, see if there's a follow through down through the bottom. And that would be probably your spring locally. Probably. What is this? Statistics. Yeah, it would be a very rapid fire jump. So the purpose of that would have to be to jump the creek if you're assuming that that happens. So then you look at this as a, again, a series of like kind of downward motions pointing to some terminal end. It just looks kind of obvious now that they're generating that. Maybe over here. It looks like 489. Yep, looks like 489. So it may take a little longer than expected, but if it did go down, maybe 489, and then who knows? I mean, you could set up a little tiny accumulation and drop again. I know it stinks, but it is what it is. You'd have to see it work its way out, and I can't, until I see the motion, I wouldn't be able to draw all the specifics because it's really small. But I would say that on the whole, then you could have a pretty strong move back out. This should jump the creek. In succession, it would jump one after the next after the next. So it'd just go all the way, I would think. This first one would probably be the most obnoxious because I'd probably be really tight, like nothing's happening. And the second one, likewise, kind of like nothing's happening. And this is the big one, I think. Yeah, you end up back at 5 on Friday. I know. You guys are like, well, that doesn't follow the other thing. No, it doesn't. But I'm just looking at the way this is building out. Whatever. Point being, it looks pretty simple in some ways. Like, down, back up. So if you wanted to simplify it, I can always do that for you. Potential for more delay here would be to iterate again and then have the iterations break down in succession and head to whatever low you're trying to get to, probably around that 489 area. Yeah. But like I said, this is kind of where you could have a change of character, because in this particular example, if it breaks out and it doesn't achieve the goal of the breakout, and then it does it again and it doesn't achieve the goal of the breakout, you're looking at 2 incompleted moves, right? So if the goal of the breakout was the 62% and you've left on the table like the rest of it, these are not gone forever. Like, these kind of things come back, as we found, and they kind of build out to, again, be pretty important later on. So if you keep having these like false breakouts, yeah, again, they can seem like really misleading, like, well, I don't really understand why it's not going, and I get it. But these kind of moves add up. It's hard to say. If it changed character, it just goes back up. It's not even complicated. It just finds support here and then rises back up. And it just looks like a retracement to that breakout, and then it goes all the way up. That's super simple. You know what I mean? There's nothing to it. But if it doesn't, and you break out again later, like here, for instance, I think that adds into that move. It's a way of getting back to the same place. It's like the liquidity being bought up but not followed through on. Yeah, I know, but this is a important area for AMC. It's like super significant. I know I've said that before, but it really is very important. This is now like a double wedge breakout, you see? So wedge 1 right here, wedge 2 right here. I mean, it's got the potential to go all the way to 511 right now. If it doesn't, I think you'll see like a head fake, and then you kind of get like another of the same thing here, and then you probably would see maybe even at that point it go down. But if it goes up, it should just go straight up to the 512 mark, like we were saying earlier today. It's not complicated. So we'll just have to wait it out. Probably if I get off to go take a lunch break, it'll do something. It's already doing something. You're like, it's moving, books, it's moving right now. You're not watching. Yeah, I'm watching, dude. I'm watching. Just wait. The break for this one would have been up here at like 504. So it's the same price. Keeps going back to the same like 503, 504 level. So the breakout for that wedge wasn't significantly higher than that. So it would be another place to possibly sell off. Does that make sense? This little wedge, I mean, it only had a break to like 504. So that's a little strange. It kind of makes me think that that means they're sort of going to use this as like a knockdown point. And if they don't use it and it gets above there and finds support, good chance we're making our headway towards 512. So nothing's really changed from this morning, and this morning I was feeling pretty happy with what I was seeing. There's not really anything here that's really bad. Even if it came down again, I'd just be like, okay, so it pumped up, distributed so it could sell down to a low. Whoop-de-doo, you know. As long as it doesn't lose this creek, I don't really care. I think it's more of the same, and it would be annoying, but it's not bad, you know. And there's still the nature of like, where are those EMAs? And we're not going to know the answer to that till near the end of the day. Like, we just aren't. I want to be able to give you like an answer now. It's about halfway through the day. 4 hours, candle should be done. So you might get some data update there, but I'm doubtful that anything's changed. I'm very doubtful that anything's changed from earlier. So volume picked up a bit, which is good. Monday first candle, Tuesday first candle, Wednesday first candle. And it picked up from yesterday's candle, which is good, but it's on the whole, it's still downtrending. Looking at that first candle of the day, still kind of trending down. No change yet in those RSIs. There's still, or RSIs, and those EMAs, still 498, 499. I wouldn't have expected them to change till maybe till the end of the day or tomorrow or even the next day. Just know that it's going to happen soon. But it wouldn't be likely to change now. I was just kind of like thinking about it. And then it looks like I can't grab the darn line, so I can't see it. I need to move that EMA above on the window here. Find it. I gotta grab it so I can see it. Oh, like, what are you talking about? So like in TradingView, it always puts your price action kind of ahead of everything else, but you can find the indicator usually. They put them down bottom almost always, but you can take that indicator and move it above the price. It's just a little technical thing, and then you can see it better if you need to see it. So if you didn't know you could do that, you can do that in the object tree. All right, because I need to see like where it is, and it's hard because the candle like makes it you can't see it. So you could move those indicators above if you want. So it's still sitting at 5. So anytime we're above 5, even if we're only above it by a penny, y'all, it's important. You're trading above that 200 on SMA on the daily, which is pretty significant. Which we haven't been doing until here on like the 13th. So, yep, not much else to say. So I'm going to take my lunch break. I will be back today. I hope we have good news, but I do need to kind of follow up on today. I don't want to just leave it at that. I think that we've got plenty of time to talk about other things and whatever. So, yeah. So I understand that, you know, with the launching of quote unquote a membership program, it's going to feel like a big change, but the day-to-day activity here is probably going to be mostly the same. So don't think of it as like a huge, oh no, you know, he's going for our money now. No. I mean, frankly, if I'm doing well trading, I don't need your money, right? That should always be the goal. But I do appreciate you guys hearing me out on that. It's probably going to be something I have to talk about here or there because I care about it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But that looks like a really nice breakout on the 30-minute, doesn't it? It looks really clean. I like that chart. But you know, we went on a little aside for a while, but I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Everything starts somewhere. You have to make the first step. Otherwise, things don't happen. So, these are the first steps for me. Baby steps. There's no way this is going to be some kind of huge nonprofit deal that affects thousands and thousands of people one day unless you take the first step. And that might not be a goal that I ever get to see in my lifetime, but it'd be cool if it was. You just never know until you start it. Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys after lunch. Have a good lunch. I'll be back. Zooming out. Oh. What do you want to see? We're in a really good spot. We're still above the creek here, and that 200 is like coming down just to where the creek is. It's like right here. We've kind of popped above it and below it at different times, but yeah, we look good. I don't know what you were referring to when you said that. But we're still in a good spot. Like, so even in another attempted sell-off right here, that's what I was saying, it's still in a good spot. We've made enough space. We could come down and be fine if we need to do another dip. I'd prefer to stay above 5 now, but we'll see. All right. Have a good lunch, guys. I'll be back an hour and a half or so.